Fan Hang couldn't help but laugh as the school bell rang and a group of girls trashed the worst student in class, claiming he only got by because he was an heir. The rumors were ridiculous to him since he knew he was the school's true math genius. Ignoring the gossip, he called his father to check on a delivery they had planned for that day. To his surprise, a cold, unfamiliar voice answered the phone and dropped a devastating bombshell. His father had been removed from his position as chairman and arrested on serious corruption charges. Before he could process the shock or ask any questions, the call was abruptly disconnected. Panicked, he flagged down the first taxi he saw and demanded to be taken to the Tian's Peninsula immediately. The driver sped off, but the mood shifted the moment the boy realized he didn't have a single dollar on him. Growing suspicious and impatient, the driver demanded payment for the ride. Trying to save face, the passenger claimed he came from a billionaire family and handed over an ultra-exclusive credit card that should have had millions available. But his confidence vanished in an instant. The moment the card was used, every cent was already gone. The payment terminal declined the card immediately. The cab driver completely lost it, accused the passenger of being a scammer, and without a second thought, slammed a heavy punch into the boy's face. As the young man desperately tried to explain that he was rich and had no idea what had happened, the driver demanded the fare while threatening to beat him even more, quickly realizing he was dealing with nothing more than a broke wannabe rich kid. The scene cuts straight to the family's luxurious mansion. The young man tried to force his way inside but was stopped at the door. A woman stepped out and hit him with the harsh truth. After his father's downfall and the complete freeze of the family's assets, the mansion was all she had left. To drive the final nail into the coffin, she revealed that she had already filed for divorce, turning the young man into a complete nobody. Taking full advantage of his humiliation, the arrogant Wykin showed up to throw him off the property, claiming he wasn't even worthy of setting foot in the yard. Drawn by the commotion, Wykin's polished-looking father, Sheich Chen, also appeared at the entrance. Together, they mocked the protagonist mercilessly, treating him like trash while making fun of his father sitting behind bars. Boiling with rage but refusing to back down, the young man made one final promise. Their peaceful lives were over, and he would personally destroy everything they owned. The rival family patriarch knocked the young man to the ground with a brutal kick, spitting out that all of his arrogance had only existed because of his family's fortune. In the traitor's eyes, the protagonist was nothing more than a useless heir, the perfect failure who had made it possible to steal the entire family fortune. Lying on the ground, the young man threw their betrayal back in their faces, reminding them how his father had always helped them. The truth finally came out. The chairman's arrest had been a setup orchestrated by them. Having no interest in listening any longer, the villain pulled out a blade and stabbed the young man without hesitation, leaving him bleeding on the ground. As the murderers panicked while trying to figure out how to get rid of the body, the protagonist's vision slowly faded. Clutching a pendant with his mother's picture inside, he refused to accept such a pathetic ending. Suddenly, a brilliant golden light tore through the darkness, projecting the hologram of a young woman. Certain that he had died, the young man froze when the mysterious figure demanded payment in exchange for granting any wish. She quickly shattered the idea of an afterlife, revealing that she was actually a supreme donation system. Realizing he had stumbled upon the opportunity of a lifetime, he asked how much it would cost to go back exactly 1 year. A digital screen flashed the price, $100 million. To someone consumed by revenge, that price was an absolute bargain. Without the slightest hesitation, the young man confirmed the transaction, desperate to return to the past. The system even celebrated at first, believing it had found a billionaire client, but the excitement instantly disappeared when the available balance stalled at only $70 million. Branded a loser by the artificial intelligence, the young man swallowed his pride and begged for a loan. Complaining the whole time, the system finally approved the loan but charged a ridiculous 20% interest rate. Even stunned by a rate that would make any loan shark smile, the protagonist accepted the deal, confident that his father's untouched fortune in the past would easily cover the debt. The miracle worked. He opened his eyes and found himself at the center of his old coming-of-age celebration, surrounded by guests relieved to see him awake. He was alive and back in the game, but the triumphant moment was interrupted when someone from his past threw themselves into his arms, crying and desperately demanding his attention. Focused on his second chance and disgusted by the choices he had made in his previous life, the young man simply pushed the person away, wondering how he could have ever had such terrible taste before. A dark smile spread across his face as reality finally sank in. He had truly traveled back in time. In his previous life, on that very day, Ween had sabotaged the Lamborghini his father had given him. The horrific crash had nearly cost him his life and became the perfect excuse for the traitor to be named the company's official heir. But now the game had changed. With the donation system on his side, the young man was ready to make his enemies pay for every mistake they had made. To test his new weapon, he called the artificial intelligence, and it responded immediately. The mood of revenge, however, was instantly interrupted when the entity demanded immediate repayment of the loan it had given him for traveling through time. Remembering the fortune he had received as a birthday gift, the protagonist knew exactly how to clear his debt. He searched for an overly dramatic and clingy person at the party to find out where all of his expensive gifts had been stored. The person pointed him toward the underground garage, but tried getting way too close in the process. Already fed up with the unwanted attention and seeing his reputation going down the drain, the young man shoved the person away and demanded some space. Focused on his goal and disgusted by the constant advances, he turned around and headed underground. When he reached the gift room, it looked like a treasure vault filled with luxury items. Excited by the mountain of wealth, he asked the artificial intelligence if everything there would be enough to cover his debt. The answer hit him like a bucket of cold water. The gifts would pay off the principal loan, but the mountain of interest was still outstanding. Frustrated, he compared the system to a greedy loan shark, but he had no other choice. Without wasting another second, he grabbed an incredibly expensive designer watch and started the donation process. Without slowing down, the young man began dumping his birthday gifts into the system's interface. A $500,000 item, a $70,000 luxury bracelet, and a gemstone-encrusted piece of jewelry worth $120,000. As he continued clearing out the room, his eyes landed on the biggest prize in the garage, his red Lamborghini. It was the very same car that had nearly sent him to an early grave in his previous life after a horrific accident. Suddenly, he spotted a masked man quietly sneaking away from the vehicle. Everything clicked instantly. That was the rat who had sabotaged the brakes and caused the tragedy. Without thinking twice, the young man rushed forward and grabbed the criminal by his clothes before he could escape. But the masked man wasn't some amateur. In one dirty move, he threw a cloth over the protagonist's face to blind him before unleashing a brutal barrage of punches straight into his face. The young man crashed to the ground, completely dazed. Mocking him the whole time, the attacker called him worthless trash and prepared another blow, sneering that down there, where fists did the talking, his father's fortune wasn't worth a single penny. Getting beaten badly, the young man made a desperate decision and activated the system, offering up the sports car in exchange for any combat ability. The artificial intelligence scanned the vehicle before delivering its verdict. With the brakes severely damaged, the Lamborghini's value had dropped to only $1 million. With the sabotage now confirmed on the screen, he immediately ordered the sale. The system opened a menu of abilities, offering the Iron Fist technique for exactly $1 million, while illusion skills cost $8 million. With punches still raining down on his face and no time to be picky, the young man demanded the ability that could be activated immediately. Without hesitation, the system completed the purchase of Iron Fist, completely turning the tables. The confirmation sounded like music to his ears, and the fight changed instantly. The moment Iron Fist activated, the young man's hand became engulfed in blazing crimson flames. It was finally time to pay his enemy back, completely underestimating the danger. The masked man laughed, calling the young man stubborn before charging straight at him, convinced he could finish him off with ease. Huge mistake. Without blinking, the protagonist pulled back his arm and unleashed a devastating punch straight into the center of the attacker's face. Against an ordinary human body, the power of Iron Fist was absolutely overwhelming. The impact was so violent that it launched the masked man straight into a stone wall, forcing a piercing scream of agony out of him. Reality hit the villain like a truck. His target wasn't a punching bag anymore. Taking advantage of the opening, the protagonist cornered the intruder and demanded to know who had hired him. As his only answer, the coward pulled out a deadly knife and lunged forward in one desperate attack. Thanks to his sharpened reflexes, the young man dodged at the very last second, leaving the blade buried deep inside the stone wall. Using that brief distraction, the criminal spun around and ran for his life, shouting that this fight was far from over. Alone once again, the young man pulled the knife out of the wall and immediately figured everything out. That throwing knife was the unmistakable signature of Wykin's family, originating from Kinzo. The memory came rushing back. His enemy's father had recruited a henchman from that very region. They had made one fatal mistake by underestimating him. Staring down at his own hands, the young man felt his blood begin to boil as the true power of a warrior awakened and surged through his veins. Even so, his standards remained incredibly high. Turning toward the system's hologram, he complained that the damage from such a basic attack still wasn't impressive enough and demanded a way to make it even stronger. Without delay, the artificial intelligence began explaining the Iron Fist's evolution system. The artificial intelligence quickly laid out the rules. Iron Fist had 3 different levels. Reaching the advanced stage would cost a staggering $10 million, while he was currently stuck at the very first level. Tired of the system's endless greed, the young man decided it was time to stop being friendly. He quit calling the interface Little Sis and gave it the nickname Donatia instead. The entity hated the new name, but he simply laughed it off and kept moving forward. Back in the main hall, his friends cheered the moment he returned. The only problem was that the same loud, overly clingy guest from earlier crossed his path again, insisting they enjoy the party together. Having absolutely no patience for people who couldn't take a hint, the protagonist bluntly told the guy to go to hell and demanded that he stay away. In the middle of the commotion, the traitor Wyken walked over, surrounded by gold-digging girls who immediately wrapped themselves around the birthday boy. Wearing his usual fake smile, the villain presented his gift a ridiculously expensive gold watch. The young man instantly saw through the hidden motive behind the gesture, but the watch's value caught the donation system's attention. With the gift box in his hands, he thanked Wyken for the generous present before immediately firing back with a sarcastic remark. Looking his rival straight in the eye, he announced that he was going to give the luxury watch to the annoying guest he had just chased away, rejecting the gift right in front of everyone. Taking advantage of everyone's attention, the young man stepped forward and announced that he was about to perform a magic trick. He confidently declared that the priceless watch would disappear before the eyes of the entire crowd. With every guest staring in anticipation, he touched the gift and warned them that, within seconds, the expensive treasure would simply vanish. The artificial intelligence immediately confirmed the value $100,000 added to his balance. The instant the young man's finger touched the watch, it completely disappeared. The entire ballroom froze. Everyone stood there with their jaws hanging open, desperately searching for the missing watch without the slightest idea how it had happened. Some guests even whispered that it had to be one of Wyken's cheap tricks, but the truth was that the villain looked just as shocked as everyone else, staring at the empty space where the watch had been only moments before. Sensing the growing suspicion in the room, the protagonist poured gasoline on the fire by challenging the wealthy guest's pride. The bait worked perfectly. Excited by the challenge, they began piling their own luxury accessories onto the table-exclusive bracelets, designer watches, and jewelry worth small fortunes. Everyone wanted to test the limits of his magic. Without hesitation, the young man activated the system's mass donation feature. The entire mountain of gold and gemstones vanished in the blink of an eye, leaving the audience speechless and convinced they were witnessing the work of an extraordinary magician. With the entire crowd eating out of his hand, the young man looked straight at Wyken and sarcastically asked what he thought of the performance. Swallowing his anger to maintain his gentleman act, the traitor forced an awkward smile and praised the show. But the fun was only getting started. Riding the momentum, the protagonist turned toward the excited crowd and raised the stakes, asking who believed he could make an entire sports car disappear. The ballroom erupted. Guests started throwing huge bets onto the table, shouting that making a full-sized supercar vanish was absolutely impossible. Taking the bait and driven by his own pride, the villain publicly questioned his rival's abilities, promising to pay the wager if the trick actually worked. Within minutes, the challenge moved to the mansion's underground garage. The place was packed with witnesses and lined with exotic supercars, creating the perfect trap where the polished heir couldn't back out without humiliating himself. To hide the donation system's involvement, the young man put on a dramatic performance, loudly calling upon the powers of heaven and earth while secretly commanding the artificial intelligence to absorb every single vehicle at once. The result was unbelievable. Millions of dollars worth of sports cars vanished into thin air in an instant. The crowd completely lost its mind, cheering him as the greatest magician of the century. Off to the side, the traitor stood frozen with rage and confusion, unable to comprehend what he had just witnessed. Without giving him a second to recover, the protagonist stretched out his hand and demanded payment. Cornered with nowhere to run, Wyken reluctantly transferred $50 million into the young man's account. Desperate to escape the humiliation, the villain claimed that the protagonist's father had urgently summoned him to help with company business and sign several contracts. The young man's mind immediately flashed back. He knew all too well that, in his previous life, that so-called help had been the poison that destroyed his family's empire. Burning with anger but keeping a calm expression, he cut off his rival's escape and declared that he was coming along. When they arrived at the corporate headquarters, the traitor hurried ahead to take care of the paperwork, while the young man concealed his true intentions by claiming he was only there to borrow some money and pay off a few debts. Inside the chairman's office, everything felt peaceful. His father greeted him with a warm smile, asking if he had enjoyed the birthday party and all the gifts. Keeping up the act, the young man smiled back and said he was simply stopping by for a casual visit, but the seasoned chairman hadn't built a business empire by being naive. One look at his son's face was enough for him to realize that the relaxed attitude meant only one thing: his wallet was empty. The old chairman figured it out immediately. That calm, innocent attitude was the classic look of an heir who had already blown through all his money. But before he could lecture his son, the building's fire alarm suddenly blared, shattering the peaceful atmosphere inside the office. Taking advantage of the confusion, the young man quietly opened the artificial intelligence's mental interface and searched for emergency equipment. The system's virtual marketplace opened with two scanning options: an elite detector capable of covering 100 meters for the bargain price of $1 million, and a smaller version with a 10-meter range for $100,000. Not about to waste money, the young man bought the cheaper model. The results popped up instantly, revealing that the entire office was bugged. Quickly signaling for the chairman to stay quiet, he pulled out his phone and typed the shocking news. The room was filled with listening devices. In the same message, he asked if he should destroy them. His father's reply came almost immediately, proving his years of corporate experience. It was better to leave everything exactly as it was and use the trap against the people spying on them. Playing along, the two casually carried on a relaxed conversation. The young man asked for $10 million, claiming he still needed to pay off old debts, feeding the traitor's arrogance as he secretly listened in. On the other end, the enemy laughed to himself, convinced that the chairman was still throwing away his fortune to spoil his useless son. While the act continued, the young man silently revealed how much he had changed by unleashing the raw energy of his newly acquired power. The chairman's eyes widened in shock, but his surprise quickly turned into pure pride as he realized his son's warrior spirit had finally awakened. Now completely convinced that his son was no longer an irresponsible fool, the chairman approved the transfer without hesitation and told him to take care of whatever business he had. With the money secured and his father's trust fully restored, the young man said his goodbyes, carrying one promise deep in his heart: this time, there would be no room for tragedy. A few minutes later, in the lobby, the arrogant Tian approached the protagonist with obvious contempt, mocking him for begging for money once again. Fan Wan didn't even flinch. With the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, he calmly replied that he was simply asking his father for what was rightfully his. The rival, however, burned with jealousy, convinced that all that money was being wasted on someone like him. Hours later, the scene shifted to Finglin High School. The gossip started the moment Fan Wan stepped out of an ordinary taxi instead of his usual sports car. His classmates, always eager to judge, immediately piled on, laughing and spreading rumors that the rich heir had gone broke. In the middle of the teasing, one of his friends came running over, clearly nervous, to warn him that Lishan, the head of the academic department, was looking for him with some very bad news. The young man simply shrugged without the slightest concern. The confidence he carried now was absolute. There was no one left that he feared. When he arrived at the administrative office, the atmosphere was tense. Speaking with complete superiority, the director got straight to the point. Because of his poor performance on the monthly exams, school policy was clear: he was being expelled. Without backing down, the young man knocked on the door, walked in without waiting for permission, and casually asked if they were looking for him. Outraged by the disrespect, the director exploded in anger, accusing him of having no shame. The student refused to lower his head. With an unwavering stare, he slammed his fist onto the desk, putting an immediate end to the argument. As he walked away, he sarcastically thanked the director for the warning. His friend, who had witnessed everything from beginning to end, was left completely stunned, unable to understand how he had dared to stand up to the school's highest authority like that. The director continued insisting that expulsion was inevitable unless his grades improved, but the protagonist remained perfectly calm. His loyal friend, trembling with worry, swore that he would follow him wherever he went. The young man responded by pulling him into a firm hug and promising that none of those bureaucrats would ever have the satisfaction of seeing him thrown out of school. Back at the dormitory, the mood finally lightened. His roommate begged to learn those magic tricks that had left everyone speechless, hoping to use them to impress girls. Without revealing the existence of the artificial intelligence, the young man promised to teach him the basics after surviving the upcoming exams. After handing his friend a deck of cards to practice with, the protagonist finally had a quiet moment to rethink his strategy. Purchased abilities meant nothing without proper training. When he checked his balance with Donatia, the reality hit him hard. Between buying Iron Fist, purchasing the bug detector, and partially repaying his debt, his remaining balance had dropped to $352 million. When the interface reminded him that only 10% of his total debt would be forgiven every 30-day cycle, he exploded into a string of curses aimed at the system's endless greed, even though deep down he knew that was simply the price of doing business. The following day, his attention shifted back to the academic nightmare awaiting him. He woke up his chubby roommate, who confidently claimed he had already locked in passing grades for the major subjects, especially math. Feeling the pressure of the brutal series of exams still ahead, the protagonist got straight to the point and asked what tests remained on the schedule after that merciless lineup. His friend laid out the academic nightmare ahead. The monthly exam consisted of 3 practical tests. First was a strength test that required landing a punch powerful enough to register at least 200 kilograms on a punching machine. Second came an obstacle course that had to be completed within 15 seconds. Finally came the toughest challenge of all, a martial arts combat test designed to evaluate technical skill. The protagonist remembered taking the same exams the previous month, but the difference was night and day. Back then, he had been completely humiliated. This time, he already knew he was going to win. He recalled that, on the Gao continent, training was divided into 4 major paths: strength, elemental abilities, intelligence, and ancient weapons. The system got straight to the point. Mastering any of those paths could generate profits. Smiling like someone planning the perfect move, the young man asked about the prices. The list hit him like a truck. $100 million for the intelligence path, $60 million for ancient weapons, $30 million for elemental abilities, and only $10 million for the strength path. With her usual sarcasm, Donatia pointed out that he was far too broke to aim for anything other than the cheapest option. Left with no real choice, the young man swallowed his pride and selected the strength category. The system immediately displayed the available upgrades: $25 million for the basic enhancement, $80 million for Phantom Cloud, and $22 million for the 7 stars technique. The purchase nearly emptied his entire fortune. Watching his balance crash to just $10,000, the young man felt the sting immediately. Donatia, wearing a strangely satisfied expression on her digital face, casually suggested that he didn't have to stop there. All he had to do was take out another loan to unlock even more power. The young man quickly ran the numbers, and everything clicked. After his birthday, Finland Construction's stock was about to skyrocket. Without hesitation, he borrowed another $50 million, a bold gamble that made Donatia smile with satisfaction. Filled with confidence, he invested everything into the company's upcoming rise, convinced he was about to multiply his wealth. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the school's courtyard was electric. The principal stepped onto the stage to officially begin the monthly exams, and the excitement among the students was impossible to miss. The protagonist, however, felt nothing but annoyance. He wanted this whole circus to be over as quickly as possible. Seizing the opportunity, the principal fixed his eyes on the young man and reminded everyone of the school's golden rule. Failing 3 monthly exams meant permanent expulsion. The warning was clearly aimed at him. With contempt, the young man remembered how, in his previous life, his father had been forced to bribe the principal just to keep him enrolled. This time, he would write his own story without relying on anyone else. Blinded by hatred and convinced the boy was nothing but a hopeless failure, the principal forbade the teachers from offering any assistance and ordered them to keep a close watch, eager to sign the expulsion papers himself. Among the competitors stood the traitor Wyken, fully prepared to show off. The instructor announced the start of the first event, an obstacle course that had to be completed in no more than 7 seconds. Hanging over everyone's heads was the current record, an incredible 6.31 seconds. That 6.31 second record belonged to the class prodigy, Eni. The protagonist stepped up to the starting line and challenged the crowd to pay close attention to every single one of his movements. The whistle blew, and he exploded forward, activating his newly acquired ability with superhuman speed. He tore across the course with overwhelming intensity. The timer stopped at 17 seconds, successfully completing the challenge. The principal froze, completely speechless, unable to understand how the student he despised so much had managed such a performance. Even Sien Inju, the class supervisor, stood frozen in disbelief before her shock slowly turned into burning frustration. Around them, the other students refused to acknowledge the young man's ability, insisting it was nothing more than unbelievable luck and claiming he would inevitably fail the remaining tests. The second event was the Strength Challenge, where Eni's legendary record of 479 kilograms remained the benchmark. Trusting completely in Iron Fist, the young man prepared his attack. He threw every ounce of power into the punch and reached 213 kilograms. It was more than enough to pass. Watching the display, the principal felt his stomach twist. The boy who had never succeeded at anything was suddenly clearing every obstacle placed before him. The hero's hand throbbed from the tremendous impact, but his determination never wavered. Finally came the martial arts test against the Academy's feared combat robot. The rules were simple. Survive the machine's relentless attacks for 10 seconds, then press the shutdown button. The moment the countdown began, the robot launched a relentless barrage of perfectly calculated strikes with devastating force. Thanks to his sharpened reflexes and flawless technique, the young man dodged every deadly attack. When the timer reached 0, he calmly pressed the button with surgical precision, completing the challenge. Outside the arena, Wykin and the principal watched in complete disbelief as the once ridiculed protagonist dominated the entire examination. The principal's hatred wasn't fueled only by the boy's success, it came from the unbearable realization that the class's so-called failure had produced results that were, at the very least, genuinely impressive when everyone had expected him to collapse. Even Zeno, analyzing the performance with an expert eye, admitted that Fan Hang's body control was exceptional. Unable to accept reality, the principal growled that the student had to be cheating and ordered him to step forward for questioning. Keeping his cool, the young man cornered the principal with a single question. Right in front of everyone, he asked whether the principal was questioning the competence and teaching ability of the instructors who had supervised the exam. Caught in his own trap, the principal froze, unable to answer. The dean stepped in, urging his superior to keep pressing the accusations, but realizing things were about to spiral out of control, Fan Hang seized the opportunity and slipped away toward the school park. He had barely taken a couple of steps before Zeno stopped him. A chill ran down his spine. He was convinced the teacher could read minds and sniff out lies. Desperate, he called on Donatia for help. The response came instantly and, as always, at a price. $100 million for the solution. Gritting his teeth, he accepted the outrageous cost and received a capsule capable of completely restoring neural function. The system explained that Zeno suffered from deep psychological trauma that disrupted her biological rhythms and made it impossible for her to concentrate. Gathering his courage, the young man approached the teacher and offered her a cure for her hidden illness. Zeno immediately snapped in anger, horrified that a student seemed to know such personal details about her. Remaining calm despite the awkward situation, he explained that he had simply deduced it from the obvious symptoms she constantly displayed: chronic insomnia and the recurring lapses in concentration she desperately tried to hide. The accuracy of the diagnosis left the teacher speechless. Without giving her time to ask questions, the young man urged her to take the capsule, assuring her she would feel immediate relief. Before walking away, he left her with one final promise. The medicine would solve all of her problems once and for all. Zeno remained standing there in stunned silence, unable to understand how the student who had been an academic disaster only yesterday was suddenly acting with such confidence while carrying around an item like that. What the young man didn't know was that Zeno possessed the rare ability known as soul vision, a gift that allowed her to perceive the true nature and properties of any object within her reach. After examining the capsule, she instantly recognized the purity of its neural restoration effects. Driven by both curiosity and years of suffering, she finally swallowed it. The results were immediate. The mental fog clouding her thoughts vanished completely, and the endless cycles of pain that had tormented her simply disappeared as if they had never existed. For the first time in years, she was completely healthy. Her phone rang almost immediately afterward. It was her father, Wan Wei, once again insisting on scheduling another appointment with a specialist to treat her chronic condition. She cut him off before he could finish, excitedly telling him she didn't need any doctors anymore. Naturally suspicious, her father demanded to know where this miracle had come from. Embarrassed, she admitted that the item had been given to her by one of her students. The moment he heard Fan Hang's name, it struck him like a bolt of lightning. He immediately connected the young man to the son of one of his longtime business rivals. While those events unfolded elsewhere, the protagonist remained completely unaware, sitting in his dorm room with his eyes locked on the glow of his laptop. His roommate watched the stock charts with growing excitement. The shares of Fingland Construction, the company where the young man had invested his $50 million loan, were skyrocketing at an unbelievable pace. The investment had become a massive success. Smiling with the confidence of someone who could already see the future, the math genius turned to his friend and invited him to join the stock market before the opportunity disappeared. Without thinking twice, his roommate immediately agreed. His friend handed over a bank card containing more than $20 million without the slightest hesitation, trusting the protagonist completely. Even Fan Wan was surprised by that level of faith and asked if he wasn't worried about getting robbed. The answer was simple. To his friend, that amount of money meant almost nothing as long as the protagonist agreed to help him complete an F-rank mission. After asking about the objective, the young man learned that he needed to locate the headquarters of a criminal organization known as the Eastern Star. Pukas explained that it was a secretive predatory group infamous for destroying entire families through outrageously high-interest loans. His friend admired Fan Wan because he believed he accepted these missions to fight evil and protect innocent people, while in reality the protagonist only cared about gaining experience and becoming stronger. Pretending to be a righteous hero, the young man accepted the deal. He would complete the mission, and in return, he would borrow his friend's car for a few days. Hours later, while driving through the Chinan district, the protagonist summoned Donatia once again. He ordered the system to locate Klon, the feared leader of the Eastern Star. As always, the artificial intelligence saw another opportunity to make money, charging $10 million just for a basic search within a 1-kilometer radius. Watching another chunk of his hard-earned profits disappear made his blood boil. The expensive search turned out to be a trap. As soon as the payment went through, the system calmly informed him that the target wasn't located within that search area. Greedy as ever, Donatia demanded another $20 million to expand the search radius. Refusing to back down, the protagonist swallowed the financial loss and approved the additional payment, determined to find the villain no matter the cost. Losing another $20 million was painful, but the system finally delivered the answer. The target was hiding inside a building called the Joy Club. As soon as they stepped inside, they found themselves surrounded by a group of gambling-addicted gangsters. While his chubby friend trembled with fear and begged him to turn back, the protagonist had no time for cowardice. He stared directly at the thugs and demanded that their boss show himself immediately. The only response he got was a wave of laughter and hostility. One of the gangsters told the young man to get lost, insisting he had come to the wrong place. Keeping the confidence of someone who meant business, the protagonist demanded some respect and claimed that Brother L had personally requested the meeting. When Chen's assistant, Wan Lian, stepped forward to question who the intruders were, the young man got straight to the point. He gave them 3 minutes to bring Klon before him, or the destruction would begin right there. The criminals burst into laughter, mocking the pair for being so young. Tired of wasting time with empty talk, the protagonist charged forward and knocked out the first wave of resistance. In the middle of the chaos, he asked Donatia for a signal jammer. Ever eager to make a profit, the system sold it to him for $2 million, guaranteeing 10 full minutes of total communication blackout throughout the building. The young man rubbed his hands together, knowing that was more than enough time to turn the club into absolute chaos and finish the revenge that had begun in his previous life. The payment was processed instantly. Panic spread through the gangsters the moment they realized their phones had completely lost signal. None of them could call for backup. While confusion erupted around them, the protagonist leaped onto the gambling table with frightening agility, instantly taking control of the center of the room. With a simple mental command, he ordered Donatia to absorb everything sitting on top of the table into the donation system. The interface complained arrogantly about how little the items were worth, but he ignored it. This wasn't about money, it was about making a statement before claiming even greater fortunes. In the blink of an eye, the entire table disappeared before the criminals' horrified eyes. The atmosphere inside the Joy Club changed completely. One terrified thug began stammering that the protagonist possessed the legendary Lin Lin device, a forbidden technology rumored to manipulate space, time, and shadows. Fear of that mysterious power froze everyone in place. They were no longer looking at an ordinary kid. They believed they were facing someone who could bend reality itself. Sensing the shift in their attitude, one of the gangsters immediately changed his tone, suddenly treating the young man like one of Klon's allies and apologizing for the earlier disrespect. Maintaining his icy expression, the protagonist looked each of them in the eyes and warned that this would be the last time he forgave such insolence. The second in command, now drenched in cold sweat, respectfully invited him into the private storage room and told him to take whatever he wanted. Fan Wan stepped inside and immediately froze. Behind those doors was something he never expected to find inside a criminal hideout. The room was overflowing with valuable weapons. Their polished steel gleamed beneath the protagonist's hungry gaze. The fortune stored there was enormous. and he could barely contain his excitement as he realized every single weapon was about to be taken from Klon, a fitting payment for all the criminal's sins. With a mental command, he ordered Donatia to begin the purge. The system practically celebrated, confirming that the total value exceeded $100 million. Everything was absorbed instantly and without mercy. The celebration didn't last long. A shout echoed through the club. Klon had arrived. The leader of the Eastern Star was only a few steps from the entrance, and the air instantly grew heavy with the promise of bloodshed. Pukas broke into a cold sweat, certain the worst was about to happen, while the chubby friend completely lost his composure, frantically warning everyone that they needed to take the situation seriously. Fan Wan, however, remained perfectly calm, as though he still controlled the entire board. He casually walked past Klon and announced that they were already on their way out. Confused, the gang leader blocked their path and demanded to know who they were. Having completely fallen for the protagonist's deception, the assistant explained that Klon himself had supposedly ordered them to relocate the weapons stockpile. The moment Klon realized his name had been used in such an obvious scam, his fury exploded. The lie was exposed, and the Joy Club instantly became a battlefield. Hungry for revenge, the gangsters launched themselves into a frantic pursuit, determined to stop the pair from escaping. Pukas felt death tightening around his throat, convinced none of them would leave the building alive. But the protagonist had already prepared for this moment. Activating his abilities, he launched a getaway that left destruction in its wake. The magic van assured the group that it would eliminate every threat in their path, calming everyone down. Instead of continuing to run, they turned around and faced the enemies using supernatural abilities to chase them. Fan Hang moved first, knocking the attackers unconscious one after another. With one perfectly timed strike, he took down the enemy squad leader. Pukas, whose combat skills had reached an entirely new level, decided it was time to finish the pursuit once and for all, charging straight into the remaining criminals. The surviving enemies surrounded the chubby fighter in a desperate attempt to stay alive. The battle was short and decisive, ending with every one of them defeated. Just when victory seemed certain, a shuriken suddenly flew out of nowhere, aimed directly at the protagonist's ally. Without hesitation, the hero threw himself into its path, shoving his friend out of the way and saving his life. The blade buried itself deep into the trunk of a nearby tree, revealing that it had been infused with magical energy. Klon, whom everyone believed had already been defeated, emerged once again, burning with vengeance. The intruder questioned the arrogance of anyone foolish enough to invade his territory. Looking over the group, Klon acknowledged that they had awakened special powers, but he still considered them far too weak to stand against him. Overflowing with confidence, the villain unleashed an F-rank technique. Recognizing it as the peak of that rank, the chubby fighter kept his focus. Furious over everything that had happened, Klon charged straight at the pair, determined to make them pay for the damage they had caused. Fan Wan and his companion barely managed to evade the devastating attacks. Klon showed no mercy. He threw a full-force punch that slammed into both of them with terrifying power. The impact sent them flying several yards through the air. The pain was unbearable, leaving the two young men barely able to breathe and critically injured. Cornered by desperation, the wounded protagonist immediately turned to Donatia, hoping she had a way to save them. The hero tried to act on his own, but Donatia ordered him to stay calm, insisting everything was already under control. She selected the abilities needed to survive, but the price was outrageous. The protective shield and emergency rescue device together would cost $88 million. The absurd price was nothing more than exploitation. With her usual cold attitude, Donatia made it clear that any hesitation would ruin any chance of future deals. The young man found himself trapped. If he failed 3 more times, his life would come to an end. Left with no other choice, he accepted her terms. Driven by sheer determination, the chubby young man charged forward, shouting that he refused to lose and was about to prove he was stronger than Chen Lan. Irritated by such arrogance, the villain accepted the challenge as though it were nothing more than a death wish. The battle resumed, with the young fighter determined to protect his ally no matter the cost. A devastating wave of energy erupted across the battlefield. Seeing his companion in danger, Fan Hang instantly activated a magical shield, protecting both of them from Klon's deadly attack. The villain continued his relentless assault, growing even more furious as the pair refused to fall. Just as he prepared another devastating strike, an unexpected barrier stopped him in his tracks. The interruption exposed the truth. Fan Wan revealed that Chen Lan had been working for a rival organization, explaining why Brother Wei wanted him eliminated. Exhausted and frustrated, the criminal demanded to know whether Ween had been the one who issued the order. The discovery of the enemy's hideout completely changed the direction of the battle. The protagonist shouted for reinforcements, only to be stunned when he realized the chubby friend was already running away, yelling for him to hold on while he went to find help. Feeling abandoned by someone he trusted hit the hero hard, transforming his frustration into something far more dangerous as the fight entered a new stage. Bringing down an opponent like that required patience. His strategy was simple: wear the enemy down little by little. Protected by his magical shield, the hero endured every attack, forcing his opponent to burn through his energy while keeping all of his attention focused on him. Meanwhile, the chubby young man sprinted through the streets in a desperate search for help, fully aware that Fan Wang's life depended on outside intervention. Along the way, Shen Inju happened to be riding a scooter when she spotted the panicked students. Startled by what she saw, she lost control of the scooter, crashing and being thrown onto the pavement. As soon as she got close enough, Shen Inju recognized her student and immediately understood the situation. Fan Wang was cornered, and he needed help immediately. Back at the battlefield, the atmosphere had grown even more intense. Completely exhausted, Chen Lan mocked his opponent's stubborn resilience, sarcastically calling him a masochist. Fan Wan, however, already had a plan. He immediately ordered Donatia to provide a recovery compound. The purchase went through instantly: $500,000 for an ointment capable of completely restoring his stamina. Without hesitation, the hero used it. The effects were immediate. His strength returned in full, and he charged forward with such ferocity that it completely shocked the villain. Fan Wan landed a crushing punch squarely across Chen Lan's face before unleashing a relentless barrage of attacks. Unable to catch his breath or keep up with the overwhelming pace, the villain quickly became a helpless target. With one final devastating strike, the protagonist blasted him backward, sending him crashing through a wall and destroying part of the building. Pulling himself out of the rubble, the defeated criminal stared at his opponent, finally realizing what kind of restorative item had allowed him to turn the battle around. The moment Klon understood what had happened, he decided to gamble everything. Pouring every last ounce of energy into his body, he forced himself through a horrifying transformation. His body twisted into a monstrous form, becoming even more savage as he prepared one final attack. The situation instantly became critical, and the hero realized the fight had changed once again. He reactivated his radiant shield, but after taking so much punishment, it was now operating at only 80% of its original strength. The monster lunged forward with an earth-shattering attack. But instead of breaking, the shield not only absorbed the impact, it reflected the entire force right back at its attacker. Agonizing pain exploded through the villain's hand. Completely stunned, he couldn't understand how his Dragon Flash technique had failed to pierce the barrier. Filled with cold fury, the hero ordered the bastard to shut up before ending the fight with one perfectly placed punch straight to his face. The enemy collapsed, finally paying the price for everything he had done. Keeping his composure, the young man instructed Donatia to process the loot. Searching through the defeated villain's pockets, he found nothing more than a few bank cards and a pink flash drive. The strange device looked like it contained something secret or far too personal to be made public. As he caught his breath, the hero asked the system how much profit the battle had earned him. The answer was disappointing. The bank cards held only $800,000, a laughably small amount for someone who had acted so important. Before he could think any further, concern for his chubby companion interrupted his thoughts. Hearing voices approaching from nearby, the protagonist quickly turned around, ready for whatever came next. The teacher could barely believe what she had witnessed. Watching an ordinary student defeat an elite opponent completely shattered everything she thought she knew. Moments later, the authorities arrived and sealed off the area, turning the entire scene into an official crime investigation. All the gangsters were handcuffed and taken into custody. Sienu made a point of praising Fan Hang's performance, saying he had finally proven he was capable of advancing beyond the limits everyone believed had trapped him in F rank. Watching the scene unfold, the hero realized the instructor's ambitions ran far deeper than they appeared, which explained the class's unusually high academic performance. To make his point, the man grabbed the young man's hand with excessive force and insisted on having a private conversation about his future grades. Wincing in pain, the protagonist begged him to let go, promising he would never cause trouble again. With the situation under control, the teacher decided there was no need for a hospital visit and ordered Fan Hang to return to school to fulfill his academic responsibilities. The young man agreed and left with his chubby companion behind the wheel. During the drive, the driver tried to break the silence, but the hero remained lost in thought, regretting how little durability his radiant shield actually had. Checking his finances, the young man decided to transfer $30 million to his friend as a reward, warning him not to ask any questions about the amount. But when they checked the account balance on the phone, they were both stunned. The account was empty. Donatia had quietly withdrawn every last dollar to pay off a hidden debt. Furious, the protagonist demanded to know how much he still owed. The donation system processed the request and displayed the remaining balance, $160 billion. Staring at the unbelievable number, unable to understand how his debt had reached such an astronomical amount, he could only feel his anger growing stronger. Donatia shamelessly claimed she deserved a commission for all the assistance she had provided, then immediately started acting pitiful. Having no patience for the dramatic performance, the young man cut her off, reminding her that she had already made more than enough money. Not long afterward, Finglin High School held an award ceremony. The protagonist was honored for successfully completing his mission, receiving an elite military rank, a reward of $5 million, and 2 vials of serum designed to strengthen mental abilities. The entire student body was left speechless. That kind of honor normally required nearly 10 years of training and was reserved exclusively for instructors. Despite the jealousy surrounding him, the young man accepted the recognition with a calm smile. Watching everything from the sidelines, Wyken couldn't hide his resentment. Knowing that Yahello had ties to his enemies, he came up with a dirty revenge scheme. He created a manipulated video showing a teacher in a compromising situation with a student, planning to send it to the principal and destroy both of their reputations. After class, the atmosphere shifted. The students talked about how difficult the recent battle had been and how important it was to master the greatsword. Impressed by his chubby friend's determination, the hero listened as he mentioned a group of highly skilled girls from Sichuan staying at the Finglin Hotel. Curious, the two of them decided to check it out. As they approached the area, music suddenly filled the air, followed by the silhouette of a graceful dancer. It was the streamer Lin Miao. The song she was listening to wasn't exactly impressive, but her appearance immediately caught both of their attention. Deciding to show his friend how to approach someone with confidence, the protagonist walked straight toward her. He introduced himself as a devoted fan of her content, catching Lin Miao completely off guard. Sensing an opportunity to manipulate him, she smiled sweetly and asked him to hold out his hand for a special gift. The moment he did, she grabbed his hand and boldly suggested they become involved right then and there. The ease of her advance immediately turned him off. He rejected her without hesitation, making it clear he wasn't interested in getting involved with just anyone he met. The rejection bruised Lin Miao's pride, and she angrily demanded an apology. Looking at her with complete indifference, the young man ignored her entirely and walked away with his friend. The streamer was furious. Her usual seduction tactics, including expecting men to eagerly offer her foot massages, had completely failed. But the girl from Sichuan wasn't about to give up. She secretly cast a powerful spiritual charm spell designed to enslave another person's will. The spell worked. The young man's mind was overwhelmed by an irresistible obsession, turning him into an obedient admirer. The scene shifted to the Finglin Hotel. While Lin Miao took a bath and prepared the room, the hero waited impatiently inside. When she finally emerged, she was dressed in a cat-themed outfit and teasingly asked whether he had really missed her as much as he seemed to. Twisted by her obsession with control, the villain prepared to punish him with a whip. Completely dominated by the charm spell, the young man desired nothing more than to please Lin Miao, even addressing her as if she were royalty. Pretending it was all part of a game, she blindfolded him, leaving him completely vulnerable. Once he could no longer see, she took several compromising photos and sent the hotel's location to Shenin, warning that if anyone contacted the police, she would ruin the young man's life. Realizing it was a trap, the teacher immediately launched a rescue operation. Meanwhile, the protagonist endured one brutal beating after another. Monitoring everything that was happening, Donatia judged the situation severe enough to intervene. Using an emergency financial expenditure, the system shattered the spiritual enchantment. Fan Wan regained consciousness instantly. Every blow had left him in agonizing pain, and his body was covered in injuries. Now fully aware of what had happened, the young man issued a cold ultimatum. Either she changed her attitude immediately, or she would pay a very heavy price. Lin Miao stood there in complete disbelief, unable to understand how her charm had suddenly stopped working. Strangely enough, the young man's resilience and physical strength only made her even more fascinated with him. The seductive atmosphere disappeared, replaced by overwhelming tension. The hero calmly revealed that everything he had done after regaining consciousness had been an act, and that thanks to Donatia's support, he had been the one controlling the situation all along. Ever sarcastic, the system gave his performance a perfect score, driving the streamer into a furious rage as she watched her entire plan for domination collapse in the face of the young man's complete indifference. The protagonist's abilities were no longer something anyone could laugh at. Determined to change the balance of power, he ignored every attempt at manipulation and threw a straight punch right into Lin Miao's face. The impact was devastating, leaving her stunned and completely shocked by his unexpected aggression. He made one thing perfectly clear: men were not disposable toys for her seduction games. With no comeback left, she handed over her phone, revealing the message she had sent to Shinin Yu. Meanwhile, the teacher was approaching the hotel, ready to rescue her student. Finding the room's door slightly open, she stepped inside and was immediately engulfed by a cloud of pink gas. The effects were instant. Overcome by intense dizziness, Shinin Yu collapsed unconscious. Watching everything unfold from the shadows was a businessman known as Imperial Heir Len. Driven by a twisted desire to publicly disgrace the teacher in revenge for the arrest of his allies and the confiscation of his weapon, he approached her with the intention of assaulting and humiliating her. His plan ended in complete disaster. A brilliant light suddenly shined from Shinin Yu's eyes as an incredibly powerful sacred magic awakened inside her. Before he could carry out his plan, she blasted him into the air. The criminal was hurled dozens of yards away, crashing violently into the surroundings, while agonizing pain spread through his body from the holy energy that struck him. The moment he realized Shinin Yu was a follower of the Oin Temple, sheer panic took over. He fled without looking back, knowing that laying another finger on her would be a death sentence. Meanwhile, the teacher slowly regained consciousness as the sacred energy protecting her gradually faded and her body returned to normal. The protagonist burst into the room, shouting that he had come to rescue her. Instead, he found the unconscious attacker lying across the bed. Believing the teacher had been assaulted, rage instantly filled him. But as he stepped closer to check on her, she suddenly opened her eyes. Still completely disoriented, Shinin Yu looked up and saw her student standing over her. Horrified, she immediately assumed the worst. Without hesitation, she slapped him across the face, convinced he was the mastermind behind the entire humiliating incident. She accused him of carefully planning everything in order to take advantage of her, even showing him the messages she had received as undeniable proof. The young man defended himself passionately, insisting that no matter how reckless he might be, he would never do something like that. He even offered to prove his innocence however she wanted. Things only became worse when they entered another room and found nothing but the villain's clothes scattered across the bed. Convinced she was being mocked, the furious teacher slapped the hero across the face again and threatened to kill him. Completely fed up, the young man ordered Donatia to locate the snake woman so he could clear his name and settle the score. The system, however, simply mocked the request. Donatia bluntly informed him that a bankrupt user couldn't afford services like that. Feeling utterly humiliated, the protagonist shouted that they shouldn't underestimate him, reminding the system that he still hadn't received the reward for completing his latest mission. After a brief pause, Donatia admitted her mistake, realizing she had forgotten to credit the reward to his account. Fan Wan carefully stored away what remained of his fortune. The next morning, he immediately noticed something different. Looking at his hands, he saw a faint glow radiating from them, realizing his strength had reached an entirely new level. The constant ringing of his phone interrupted his thoughts. The caller ID displayed Sin. He answered without hesitation. On the other end, the tone was firm and authoritative. His mentor, Lian Yuyan, ordered him to report immediately to the Finglin Imperial Academy. His assignment was straightforward: train the newest recruits assigned to the local division. When he arrived, the atmosphere was tense. Lian Yuyan immediately questioned Fan Wan about the rumors surrounding his battle against a high-level opponent. The young man tried explaining what had happened to the weapons involved in the fight, but the mentor reacted angrily, accusing him of hiding equipment that belonged to the Star Group. Fan Wan firmly denied possessing anything illegally. He explained that he had used his absorption technique to completely consume every weapon. Realizing the process had permanently erased the equipment with no possibility of recovery, the mentor stood there in disbelief. After understanding the technical details, however, Lian Yuyan unexpectedly laughed, relieved that the troublesome equipment had finally disappeared from the system for good. The donation system confirmed that the protagonist's ability to manipulate and absorb objects had grown even stronger. Fan Wan respectfully greeted his mentor, who immediately took the opportunity to complain about the clutter inside the laboratory. Claiming there was no space left, Lian Yuyan pointed toward a massive pile of junk and ordered the young man to clean it up, making it obvious that the task was also meant to test the rookie's endurance. The moment they stepped inside, they found the room overflowing with old scrap and discarded materials. Speaking in an unusually serious tone, Donatia warned him to stay alert for hidden traps or deceptive mechanisms among the debris. Confused, the young man wondered if his mentor was secretly testing him. Lian Yuyan reinforced the warning, insisting those materials could be dangerous and openly questioning whether the young man was even capable of handling them safely. Completely confident, Fan Wan proudly declared that a real man could handle a little hard work. Once Lian Yuyan left him alone with the cleanup, the protagonist began examining the pile more carefully. To his surprise, what everyone considered worthless junk was actually filled with priceless treasures. There were highly radioactive materials worth $50 million, a meteorite valued at $15 million, and even something labeled Star Creep that, after Donatia analyzed it, turned out to be another meteorite worth $65 million. The hero wasted no time. Raising his hand dramatically, he called upon the heavens and the earth before silently activating the donation system to process everything at once. Within seconds, the enormous mountain of scrap completely vanished. Watching the entire pile disappear before his eyes, Lian Yuyan stood frozen in disbelief. He had never expected such efficiency from someone so young. While for Donatia, the simple cleanup had just turned into another incredibly profitable business opportunity. A red Zan Yuan pill was awarded to speed up the young man's progress. His mentor pointed out that extreme exhaustion was an expected side effect and praised Salaga's flawless performance for earning the reward so quickly. During the absorption process, the visibly drained young man asked if there were any more leftovers available. His curious question about his suction technique's seemingly limitless capacity made the veteran burst into laughter. The boy, sounding genuinely confused, explained that he could absorb massive amounts of energy without any effort. Hearing that, Lian Yuyan offered him a spot on his squad. The boy turned it down, saying he had to carry on the family business. When he casually added that his only goal was to live an easy life, the mentor was so annoyed that he kicked him out on the spot, despite having a lucrative mission in mind for him. Shortly afterward, the soldier pulled out a device that measured energy waves. The screen displayed 0. The complete absence of any readings confirmed that the young man was, in fact, a spiritual warrior. The scene then shifted outside the underground complex. The young man questioned Donati about the operation's profits. The system reported a balance of 299 million, but also an outstanding debt of 1.3 billion. The staggering amount barely caught his attention, as he only cared about having fun. Just then, a group of troublemakers showed up, accusing Jean Wan of insulting one of the girls in their gang and swearing revenge. The young man didn't even blink, fully prepared for a fight. Sensing the hostility, the girl pointed at her brother as the target. He glared at the young man with open hatred, convinced the hero had humiliated his sister. The tension escalated as the siblings prepared to attack. The reason behind all that rage was the little sister's tears. She had made up a fake story to manipulate her brothers into turning against Fan Hang. Armed with shurikens, the villain stepped forward, determined to avenge her, launching deadly projectiles at incredible speed. Fan Hang instantly recognized Tanman's signature weapon and, with a perfectly timed leap, dodged every single attack. The enemy couldn't believe the young man had avoided everything so effortlessly. As Donatia warned him about the danger, the system revealed an even greater threat. The projectiles were part of the Black Crown, poisonous weapons capable of infecting anyone just by getting close. The situation was critical, but the system recommended using remote injections to neutralize the threat. Determined to strike back, Fan Hang resorted to a legendary technique. Donatia acted quickly, transferring the data for Buddha's hand, fake version 0.1, into the hero's database. The download finished within seconds, and the boy mastered the skill instantly. The battle immediately turned around. Fan Hang unleashed the new technique and defeated one of the brothers in the blink of an eye, leaving his opponent completely stunned by the overwhelming power on display. After finishing the fight, he admitted he was amazed by the strength of that makeshift version. Donatia quickly fired back with sarcasm, reminding him that since he couldn't afford the authentic 300 million version, he should be grateful for the budget fix she had just provided. The crowd watched in complete silence. Even though he was admired for his intelligence and good looks, relying on counterfeit techniques stained his reputation. Without wasting a second, the young man calculated his next move against the remaining thugs, firing Buddha's hand at the second brother. The impact was devastating, sending everyone nearby into a panic over the raw power of the technique. The technique, however, was unstable and completely drained the hero's energy, leaving him dizzy and trembling. Disaster was only avoided because the Zanyuan pill, still being digested, stabilized his body. It became obvious that if version 0.1 caused this much damage, developing version 0.2 had become an urgent priority. Without anyone noticing, Ween recorded everything on his phone and sent the footage to the director. The superior dismissed the entire situation, convinced that awakening the warrior bloodline didn't change the fact that the young man was, in his eyes, still worthless. The conflict escalated when the opponent pulled out a microphone and unleashed a 7-wave mental sonic attack. The assault was incredibly powerful, forcing Fan Hang to act just to silence the unbearable noise. The female opponent was left in shock when she realized he was completely ignoring her attack. The sound, which was meant to manipulate the hero's movements as if he were dancing, became useless. Since his senses had been altered, he was completely immune to its effects. Frustrated and humiliated by her target's immunity, the young woman finally revealed her true identity. She was the goddess of assassination, sent to eliminate him. With her pride badly wounded, she declared that this was only the beginning, promising she still had plenty of deadly techniques ready to use against him. Zhang Hang effortlessly repelled the girl's attack and countered with overwhelming force, leaving her unable to fight back. Despite the brutal blow, he deliberately avoided striking her face, sparing her beauty out of a hint of guilt. Never missing the chance to tease him, Donatia explained that the reason for her defeat was simple. The young man had become her mentor, and after all, she was a goddess. With a smug grin, the young man joked that flashy tricks like hers didn't work on him. He even complimented Donatia's beauty, proudly bragging that he had become her master. The tension faded, however, when the girl was suddenly overwhelmed by a distant memory. She recalled walking through the forest with her mother, learning about magic and the promise of finding true love. Her mother had given her one foolproof rule: the right man would be the one who could resist both her charm and her supernatural abilities. As she looked at the young man, it finally hit her. He was completely immune to her powers. With tears of confusion in her eyes, she walked away from the battlefield, leaving the hero utterly baffled as he simply watched her leave. Back at the shelter, the atmosphere was completely different. A chubby friend nervously showed him that footage of the battle was spreading across online forums, sparking controversy and endless insults. Fan Hang couldn't have cared less. He simply hit the like button on the posts, treating his sudden fame as nothing more than a chance to beat up even stronger opponents. When his friend warned that he was in real danger of being expelled from the academy, the exhausted young man brushed it off without showing the slightest concern about the consequences. Completely worn out, Fan Hang wanted nothing but some peace and quiet. He sent his friend away so he could rest before getting back to his plans. Once he was alone, he plugged in the flash drive that had belonged to Rosa. It contained highly classified data, but it required a password with a 30-second countdown. Without wasting any time, he called on Donatia to crack the digital lock. The system charged $5 million for the service, and the hero approved the payment without hesitation. The hack was completed within moments, revealing files that contained the coordinates of a red zone. Suddenly overcome with urgency, Donatia begged him to take her there. Fan Hang resisted, complaining about the toxic pollution and the monster-infested wasteland, but the deep sadness in her voice eventually changed his mind. The moment he saw her desperation, he realized this was far more than an ordinary request. When they arrived at the restricted area, surrounded by warnings of imminent danger, fear immediately set in. The hero suggested turning back, but Donatia challenged him, asking whether he was truly a brave leader or just another coward afraid of death. Refusing to lose face, the young man laughed it off, claiming he had only been joking. The truth was revealed moments later. Donatia's memories were tied to that desolate place. She hadn't been born into a world of advanced technology and luxury, as he had assumed, but in that very hostile land. Confused about her origins, she felt compelled to explore the area to discover who she really was. The system guaranteed protection from the radiation and promised that, if their search succeeded, it would perform all future services free of charge. Between the constant danger and the pair's suspicious behavior, Donatia detected something incredibly valuable, a meteorite hidden somewhere nearby. The meteorite's glow suggested that exploring the crater would be extremely profitable, but their luck changed the moment the system detected the presence of dragon-tooth grass. The boy barely had time to celebrate before a monstrous creature burst from the shadows and attacked him with terrifying ferocity. Donatia shouted a warning, desperately telling him to stay away from the plant and dodge the creature's attacks. The monster, a colossal beast enraged after centuries of hibernation, used its massive tail to trap the young man. Even under heavy pressure, Fan Hang gathered his energy and unleashed a magical punch directly at the monster's tail. The attack accomplished absolutely nothing. The creature's shell was so tough and razor-sharp that the recoil nearly left him unable to move. Only then did he realize what he was truly facing, a gigantic shadow scorpion, with the dragon tooth grass growing right out of its head. As he sprinted away using every ounce of his speed, the young man demanded an explanation from the system. Donatia quickly revealed the truth. The Shadow Scorpion was powerful enough to rival elite fighters and possessed armor that was nearly impossible to penetrate. Their only chance was to land the Swan Alarm Strike precisely on the tiny white spot atop its head, the creature's one and only weak point. Fan Hang poured all of his strength into the recommended technique. The impact triggered a violent explosion, sending the Shadow Scorpion crashing to the ground. Taking advantage of the opening, the boy ripped the dragon-tooth grass from the creature's shell. Despite what looked like a victory, the battle wasn't truly over. His devastating strike had only weakened the monster's defenses rather than finishing it off. The enemy had been held back, but staying there any longer would have been suicide. Fan Hang took off in the opposite direction, only looking back after several long minutes of running. Luck was on his side. Because of its poor eyesight, the Shadow Scorpion failed to continue the chase. Donatia celebrated their success, reminding him that the dragon-tooth grass was worth 50 million. The hero, however, felt like a complete fool for risking his life for such a small reward, especially after she immediately took the plant away from him. Her explanation was simple. She needed it to survive because her existence was fundamentally different from that of a human. Meanwhile, the real danger was closing in. Enemy trackers had pinpointed his location near Senator Chen. He had known entering that territory was a risky decision, but now they were completely surrounded. The next events unfolded inside a camp belonging to the Finglin Empire, a protected zone designed to withstand disasters. Fan Hang knew he had to infiltrate the camp, but without standard protective gear, he risked being mistaken for a mutant or a wild creature. Donatia solved the problem by giving him a mask disguised as protective equipment. He laughed at the clever trick, impressed by how simple and effective it was. The system guided him beyond the protective barrier, promising priceless artifacts hidden inside. The thought of becoming rich sent the young man's adrenaline through the roof. However, the moment he entered the safe zone, something felt terribly wrong. There was absolute silence, with no guards or signs of life anywhere. Donatia feared that a disaster had already taken place, but Fan Hang, driven by greed, ignored the warning and began digging into the ground with frantic determination. His efforts paid off almost instantly when he uncovered a celestial root, an item worth an astronomical fortune. The harvest was a huge success. A celestial root worth 5 million and a lilac flower valued at 8 million. The young man could barely contain his excitement, already calculating how many more fortunes he would uncover in that area over the next few days. As they left the safe zone, they were caught in a toxic green rain that soaked everything around them. Donatia urged him to stay cautious, warning that the rising mist was dangerous while the system was still calculating the exact distance to their final destination. During the route optimization, a notification appeared. Someone they knew was nearby, locked in a fierce battle against mutated creatures. It was Cien Indu. Protected by her combat suit, she was fighting off multiple irradiated monsters. Despite her skill and fearless determination, the difference in strength was obvious. She fought with everything she had, but the mutants were simply too massive and relentless. During one brief opening, one of the monsters managed to land a hit. Watching from a distance, Fan Hang couldn't help but notice that even while wounded and surrounded by chaos, she remained graceful and unwavering. Realizing the master wouldn't last much longer, the young man didn't hesitate. Ignoring the danger to himself, he charged forward and swung his shovel with perfect precision, smashing the monster threatening Cien Indu. The raw force of the blow was enough to stagger the creatures and instantly shift the momentum of the battle. Cien Indu tried to identify her mysterious rescuer, but Fan Hang kept his identity hidden. Turning to Donatia, he demanded the support he needed to finish the fight. As their powers merged, he activated newly learned magical abilities, binding every monster inside an energy prison while preparing the final strike. The vine restraints quickly gave way under the monster's overwhelming strength. Realizing the trap was about to fail, Donatia grabbed the young man's hand and took off at full speed, leaving the battlefield behind. Reaching the green zone finally gave them a chance to catch their breath. When Cien Inu realized she was still holding the stranger's hand, she quickly pulled away, her face burning with embarrassment. She shyly thanked him for saving her, but the tension between them remained. The boy offered to remove the poison from her body, joking that it would be a shame to let an infection ruin such a beautiful face. The offer immediately made the master suspicious. She already carried blood serum and had no idea whether this mysterious man was an ally or an enemy in disguise. He calmly pointed out that the serum would be useless against the toxic vapors filling the area. Confused, She tried reading his mind, but her psychic ability failed completely against the hero. Remaining perfectly calm, he insisted he had no hidden agenda and jokingly added that if she really wanted to repay him, she could just marry him on the spot. The teasing remark made her notice one crucial detail: his earrings. She recognized them instantly. The beautiful young woman immediately dropped the helpless act, and the embarrassed young man slowly removed his mask. Zen Inu reacted with outrage, demanding to know what the hell he was doing there. Meanwhile, Ween watched everything through surveillance monitors, mocking the entire performance. Keeping his usual sarcastic attitude, the hero claimed that his destiny was simply to be a free adventurer. The master wasn't buying the excuse and ordered him to come with her, attempting to take control of the situation. The student refused without hesitation. He wasn't her disciple, and he had no intention of taking orders from her, even if she had technically just saved him. Fan Hang walked away without looking back, leaving the master alone in the unprotected zone. As she prepared to report the mission, Ween and his accomplices emerged from the shadows wearing masks, ready to ambush the sea ninjas in retaliation against Fan Hang. Although weakened, Zen Inu immediately sensed the trap, but she knew that in her current condition she would lose if she exposed her strategy. The enemies wasted no time, unleashing a colossal ice tornado. The vortex hurled the teacher high into the air, rapidly draining her energy until she lost consciousness. With no one left to resist, the attackers carried her unconscious body away to an unknown destination. Meanwhile, exhausted but determined, Fan Hang drew closer to his objective. The system suddenly issued an alert. A Beta Soul Stone was nearby. The possibility of stumbling upon another fortune filled both the hero and Donatia with excitement. But the path ahead was blocked. A group of furious mutant guardians emerged to protect the energy vein, pulling heavy weapons from their stockpiles. Surrounded by a horde of hostile mutants, Fan Hang braced himself for a brutal battle, focused on only two things: staying alive and claiming the treasure. The mutant horde was far too large for a direct confrontation. Feeling his stamina reaching its limit, the young man begged Donatia for a wide-area attack, but she flatly refused, ordering him to retreat instead. The argument escalated immediately. He called her a scam artist, while she refused to budge, explaining that their current defensive capabilities wouldn't withstand the blast if they were caught in the attack's radius. After she insisted, he reluctantly gave in and retreated, frustrated at losing access to the valuable resource vein he desperately needed. The mutants' behavior, however, caught his attention. They weren't fighting like mindless beasts. Their movements were coordinated with almost machine-like precision. Donatia confirmed his suspicion. Someone was controlling them from the shadows, a puppeteer directing the entire army. If they wanted the assault to stop, they would have to eliminate the one pulling the strings. Meanwhile, Ween and his group were unloading their loot at a hidden hideout. Zen Inu remained unconscious, completely unaware of the fate awaiting her. The villain planned to turn her into one of his puppets, underestimating the strength of the Wanyin temple she belonged to, even if the empire itself was far more powerful. Fate had other plans. While scouting the area, Fan Hang discovered an enormous beta ore deposit where mutants were mining at an industrial scale. The young man, who had been running for his life only moments earlier, had accidentally stumbled upon the very heart of the operation he wanted to rob. Although frustrated that their original plan had fallen apart, Donatia realized this was the perfect moment for him to strike with absolute precision. The villain inspected the mining site, pleased with how efficiently the mutants were extracting the ore. Donatia identified him as the one controlling the entire horde and urged Fan Hang to eliminate him with a single well-placed shot. The hero drew his celestial sound bow, silent yet deadly weapon designed for long-range assassinations, and aimed straight for the man's head. The arrow flew flawlessly, but at the last instant, the mind-controlled girl instinctively threw herself in front of the shot, taking the hit and shielding her master. Fan Hang was left stunned. The attack was completely undetectable, making such a reaction virtually impossible. With Plan A ruined, he wasted no time switching to Plan B. Letting out a taunting shout that echoed throughout the entire mining site, he openly insulted the group and challenged them head-on. The response was immediate. Every mutant abandoned the excavation and charged straight at him. The instant the horde gathered together, the hero triggered a collapse inside the mine. The ceiling caved in, sending countless monsters plunging into the abyss below. Enraged by the insult and the loss of his workers, the criminal decided the young man deserved a slow and brutal death. Activating a mystical seal, he summoned 4 puppets, stunningly beautiful women transformed into emotionless dolls with no souls or free will. He ordered them to kill the intruder. Standing before those cold, lifeless figures, the hero remained calm, quietly telling Donatia that despite everything, his real objective was to get close enough to their master. The system went into overdrive, absorbing soul stones and collecting tons of valuable resources without any restrictions. Meanwhile, furious as he watched his fortune disappear, the villain ordered his puppets to destroy the intruder immediately. 3 of them rushed forward without hesitation. One specialized in long-range combat unleashed a relentless barrage of arrows, but thanks to his superhuman reflexes, Fan Hang dodged every shot while channeling the power Donatia supplied him. A binding spell trapped the 3 puppets in place, but their physical strength was terrifying. One of them shattered the magical restraints and charged forward in a suicidal assault. Before Fan Hang could react, she detonated her own body in a devastating self-destruct attack. The explosion struck him head-on, hurling him across the battlefield through fire and rubble. Certain of his victory, the criminal ordered his subordinates to recover the body so it could be displayed as a desecrated trophy. Despite the unbearable agony, the young man still clung to a tiny thread of consciousness, barely alive. Trembling, he desperately called out to Donatia. If the system failed to respond, it would mean certain death. He forced the communication channel open, pleading for a miracle as death crept ever closer. Fan Hang desperately forced the system back online, knowing he only had seconds left to live. The system rebooted, but instead of Donatia's familiar voice, an unfamiliar young woman answered. She introduced herself as Donatia's cousin, temporarily assigned to take over in her place. Still dazed, the young man had no time to question the sudden change, although he couldn't help noticing how unbelievably beautiful the new operator was. The replacement explained that the original Donatia had exhausted all of her energy, opening a portal to save him, leaving her in a deep sleep. Fan Hang found that impossible to believe since the system supposedly prohibited the use of space-time techniques, but the new guide brushed off his questions as if they were ridiculous. She handed him a first aid kit and, with complete indifference, casually announced that she was going to do her makeup, leaving the hero to deal with the rest himself. Fan Hang swallowed one of the divine pills from the medical kit. The results were immediate. The unbearable pain vanished, and his wounds healed as though they had never existed. But even such miraculous recovery couldn't solve the danger closing in around him. The enemies, and the explosive puppets, were already pursuing him with even greater determination. The hero ran until he reached the edge of a massive abyss. Behind him, the horde of attackers closed in, preparing for one final assault. There was no way back. As cold and emotionless as ever, the system urged him to jump, insisting there was no time to hesitate. Cornered with no room for error, Fan Hang stared into the endless void, realizing that taking the leap was his only chance to survive. Gathering every ounce of strength he had left, Fan Hang sprinted at full speed and launched himself into the abyss. The freefall was terrifying, and he couldn't help feeling betrayed by the system. But just before death could claim him, the new Donatia intercepted him in midair, flew him safely down, and gently set him at the bottom of the abyss. The place wasn't the end of the road, it was a hidden structure disguised from the outside, a secret laboratory. The young man froze when he found a photograph of his mother inside. Tears filled his eyes, but the current Donatia showed no sympathy, bluntly telling him to act like a man. Opening one of the drawers, he discovered a journal filled with disaster investigation records signed by Yellen. The tension skyrocketed when Donatia detected that they were being hunted. She demanded that they leave immediately, warning that using space-time techniques attracted void drifters, deadly creatures that would soon arrive. Fan Hang hesitated, unwilling to leave without looting more treasures, but the urgency of the situation was undeniable. As they approached the exit, the young man made a shocking discovery. The girl traveling with him had a deep connection to his mother, as the two had once been colleagues. While they searched for a way out, chaos erupted back at the laboratory in the Cataclysm Zone. Furious and frustrated, Ween tore the place apart, unable to find the documents he had come for. The conclusion was obvious. Someone had already stolen the documents, and the culprits were long gone. For reasons she couldn't explain, the girl felt relieved knowing Fan Hang had escaped safely, even though a search team had already been dispatched to rescue him. Fully aware that the net was closing around him, he hurried toward the exit, insisting they leave the area immediately. Meanwhile, at the Sun Lawn camp, Lian Yuyan reported directly to the director. The atmosphere was tense. The merchant had breached the security of the restricted zone, and Fan Hang's escape was a major blow to the local authorities. Although Lian Yuyan criticized the young man for ignoring academy rules and entering forbidden territory alone, he admitted that Fan Hang hadn't wandered there by accident. He had possessed a detailed map of the area. The general had no patience for further discussion. He ordered Cien Indu to return to the academy and await new instructions while his troops launched a a full-scale search throughout the contaminated zone. With the pollution spreading out of control, they urgently began preparing for a possible strategic retreat back to the Empire. Back within the safety of Finglin Academy, uneasiness filled the air. Fan Hang's chubby friend searched every corner of the dorm room, stunned to find it empty once again. His friend's constant habit of disappearing on suicidal adventures was pushing him to the edge of a nervous breakdown. He feared Wang's stubbornness would eventually get him expelled or worse, make him disappear forever. Fan Hang, meanwhile, returned with his mind consumed by everything that had happened, fully aware that even greater dangers still lay ahead. The director hadn't been creating obstacles out of cruelty. The real reason was the faculty selection ceremony, scheduled for 1 month later, immediately after the students reached the peak of F rank. The challenge was brutal. Every student would have to earn a place in one of the 4 academies: strength, magic, intelligence, or ancient weapons. For the protagonist, reaching the highest level within just 30 days sounded almost impossible, requiring training resources that most students simply couldn't afford. The resource problem disappeared almost instantly once Fan Wan removed every obstacle standing in his way. For someone with his financial resources, money was never the issue. After handing a stash of soul stones to his companion, he was met with an emotional hug so unexpected that Fan Wan had to step back and remind him to stay focused on training. The world outside remained incredibly dangerous. Without Donatia's protection, he would have been killed long ago, making his growth more urgent than ever. Over the following days, he trained relentlessly. His dedication finally paid off when his eyes glowed with a brilliant yellow light, signaling that he had leveled up. Spending 1 crystal and 10 soul stones had proven to be well worth the investment. The peaceful training came to an abrupt end when the door slammed open. Jinu's teacher stormed inside, visibly furious. The young man watched in confusion, unable to understand why she seemed so angry. Moments later, the truth became clear. She had been beside herself because he had returned without telling anyone. Once he realized her anger was actually driven by genuine concern for his safety, the tension between them quickly faded. The commotion in the hallway didn't go unnoticed. Cien Inu's voice echoed through the building, her frustration so intense that the young man hurried into the classroom, still shaken by her explosive attitude. Before long, everyone's attention shifted to the teacher's official announcement. Only 1 month remained until the house selection, and anyone who had not yet reached the peak of F rank was ordered to identify themselves immediately. The classroom instantly erupted with laughter. Amid the mocking whispers, every finger pointed toward the protagonist, convinced he was the only student who hadn't met the requirement. He looked at the crowd with quiet amusement, keeping to himself the fact that he had already surpassed the required level earlier that very morning. Their ridicule meant nothing to him, and he was almost tempted to stand up just to put an end to the whole performance. Beside him, one of his classmates tried to step in, encouraging him to speak up, while Nikki, overflowing with arrogance, mocked him as a coward who was too scared to admit the truth. The tension escalated even further with the arrival of Fan Wei, a wealthy heir who made sure everyone remembered the class rankings, where the protagonist sat dead last. The punishment for those who fell behind was immediate: mandatory extra classes. By the time the additional training finally ended, the protagonist had completely run out of patience. Before his chubby friend could calm things down, Fan Wei walked over demanding compensation. His audacity knew no bounds. He wanted repayment over an incident involving Wang Shu, the red-haired boy who had tried to suck up to him not long before. The moment the protagonist realized the whole thing was nothing more than a cheap blackmail scheme, his anger reached its breaking point. Wei completely lost his temper, shouting that he wouldn't leave without receiving 10 million in compensation for his friend's injuries. He even had the nerve to offer a discount, saying the protagonist could settle everything by paying 5 million for emotional damages instead. The only response he got was a cold smirk, prompting the bully to question the hero's sanity while boasting about how generous he was supposedly being. Wei's rage exploded. Channeling magical energy, he summoned a massive water dragon, convinced it would completely wipe out his opponent. Instead, he was met by a single overwhelming move, Buddha's hand. The protagonist effortlessly intercepted the attack, shattered the spell, and blasted Wei several yards across the area. Silence fell over the crowd. The followers, who had been acting so arrogant moments earlier, could only stare in disbelief as their leader was defeated. Taking advantage of the opening, training, the chubby friend intimidated the remaining followers, warning that anyone else who attacked would end up exactly like their leader. Maintaining his composure, the protagonist cornered the defeated Wei, making it clear they were about to have a very honest conversation. The situation quickly took an unexpected turn when the protagonist demanded immediate payment. He even started stripping expensive items from Wei's clothing to guarantee reimbursement, deciding that even his wealthy family's fortune wasn't enough to cover the debt. As the money was transferred, the two argued over Wei's designer shirt, which he insisted had excellent resale value. The donation system, however, froze the transaction after Wei refused to hand it over, exposing just how ruthless the system's new rules had become. The rules were simple. Under Donatia's system, breaking them was asking for disaster, and the current situation proved exactly that. Wei burned with even greater hatred after being completely stripped, not just of his money, but of his dignity as well. In one final act of desperation, he unleashed another powerful magical attack. The blast barely missed the protagonist, carving a massive trench into the ground behind him. He had only enough time to raise a shield and barely survived the strike. The brief moment of peace didn't last long. A silver-haired young man suddenly appeared, cutting off the protagonist's path. It was Fanan, Wei's older brother. Seeing his younger brother humiliated, Fanan couldn't hide his outrage. With a mocking grin, he sarcastically asked whether the protagonist planned on stealing his belongings too. The cold look he received in return suggested exactly that. Fanan immediately unleashed the strong wind technique. The violent blast ripped through the area, hurling rocks and debris toward the hero like deadly projectiles. But his power was no match for Buddha's hand. With one perfectly timed motion, the protagonist redirected the entire attack and neutralized Fan on the spot. As soon as the dust settled and Fanan regained consciousness, the protagonist didn't hesitate for a second. Hand over your phone. While his chubby companion applauded the sheer confidence and complete control of the situation, Fanan had no choice but to surrender his phone. The protagonist's sarcastic, "Thanks for the financial contribution," only made the humiliation even worse for the two brothers. After stripping two members of the family of their valuables, the protagonist immediately began looking around for his next targets. His plan was ambitious. Collect enough from every relative he could find until he reached 30 million, the amount needed to wipe out his debts and keep his operating costs under control. The system's rules were absolute. If ownership of the system ever changed, he would lose everything. The protagonist realized that receiving direct money transfers didn't violate any regulations, since he was free to use property that already belonged to him or items with no owner at all. Even so, one question continued to bother him. Who exactly were the Guardians of the Void? The system refused to answer, insisting only that its rules were to be obeyed without question. Before leaving, the hero gave his enemies one final warning, telling them to bring even more money the next time they met. The focus then shifted to the training grounds, where the priority became helping his chubby friend level up. The pressure came almost immediately. He was warned that if he didn't train the rest of the group as well, the master would punish him severely. Shannon, clearly unhappy about the idea, tried to stop him, but he defended himself by arguing that his guidance was on an entirely different level. If he ever revealed his true abilities, no one in the group would even come close to surpassing him. The confidence behind his words came from the fact that he had been the first to complete the level, but the teacher wasn't impressed. In a bold challenge, she announced that she would lower her own level to match his so they could fight on equal terms. The chubby friend stood there in disbelief, realizing just how lucky his buddy was in such a bizarre situation. Together, they headed to the special training room, a private facility far from prying eyes. As the protagonist prepared for the fight, his friend wished him good luck, but the battle began under a level of pressure neither of them could have imagined. His excitement for the fight came at a painful cost. A devastating blow slammed into the protagonist's head, leaving him no time to process the pain before he was thrown violently to the ground. Letting his guard down at the moment of impact was a rookie mistake. Struggling back to his feet, he desperately begged her not to hit his face, insisting that all he wanted was to measure his strength against his master. He poured every ounce of speed, skill, and technique into the fight, trading blows on even footing, but the gap in experience between them was simply overwhelming. The teacher effortlessly blocked every attack he launched. With one smooth motion, she summoned shadow attacks that sent him flying dozens of yards away, leaving him dazed and completely shaken. In a last desperate attempt, he unleashed his legendary Sacred Strike against 100 ninjas, but despite all the practice he had put into it, the technique was still too slow. Her response was immediate, a crushing kick that slammed him back into the ground, leaving him completely overwhelmed by the pain. Watching everything unfold, the chubby friend finally understood what true power looked like. Even the most reliable techniques were completely useless against her. The merciless master didn't give anyone a chance to recover before turning her attention to the next student. Ignoring his desperate pleas to spare his face, she knocked him out cold with a single punch, ending the training session on the spot. The training left both physical scars and a lingering sense of fear throughout the group. They could barely sleep, dreading what the next session would bring. The following morning, they set out with a new plan. Near a towering waterfall in a secluded area, the protagonist and Chavi searched for a new cultivation site. At first, they doubted whether training underwater could accomplish anything, but it soon became clear that complete concentration would be the only path to success in that environment. The training wasn't random. Its purpose was to build an unshakable foundation of perseverance. The explanation was simple. Success in any of the future academies, strength, magic, intelligence, or ancient weapons, would depend entirely on the strength of the foundation they built here. The protagonist remained skeptical, questioning why someone specializing in long-range combat needed so much close-quarters training. Shinju immediately shut down the argument by bringing up Kinney's record, explaining that the academy only recognized students who mastered the fundamentals of multiple disciplines. The real shock came moments later. When the timer ran out, the boys assumed the test was over only to hear the teacher laughing. That had merely been the warm-up. The real training began in brutal fashion as massive logs started crashing down from above, demanding split-second reflexes just to survive. Each student faced a different challenge. The protagonist, training in ancient martial arts, had to master flawless footwork and precise movement to dodge the falling logs. His companion, specializing in strength, had to stop and redirect the massive logs using nothing but his bare hands. Panic set in instantly. It felt less like a training exercise and more like an attempted execution disguised as education. Completely unfazed, Cien Indu simply wished them good luck before casually informing them that this was only level 1. The protagonist tried to shield his friend by telling him to stay behind him, but the master firmly refused. This was a lesson each of them had to overcome alone. That was exactly the teacher's goal, forcing them to develop coordination. Since they weren't allowed to rely on advanced techniques, teamwork and raw physical effort were their only options. Thinking quickly, the protagonist positioned one of the logs and ordered his friend to strike it. The result was a complete disaster. The log didn't even budge. The miscalculation proved costly as another massive log crashed directly onto the hero's head. Furious, he immediately started yelling at his partner. Excuses about poor teamwork didn't impress anyone, and the master's furious shouting echoed across the training grounds as she reminded them that the rain of logs wasn't stopping anytime soon. High above them, a bird silently observed everything. Every movement, every mistake, every failure during training was being carefully recorded. It was the villain's eyes in the sky, patiently waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back. By nightfall, the exhausted group dragged themselves back to their tents. They were completely worn out, but the teacher maintained strict discipline, handing out restorative tonics and ordering everyone to get some sleep immediately. They were so exhausted that the hero's companion even suggested giving up and returning to their old lives, but the idea was nothing more than wishful thinking. Senino's training had left scars far too deep for them to pretend nothing had changed. Despite the pain, they slowly came to accept that every bit of suffering was the price of reaching a higher level 1 powerful enough to earn everyone's admiration. Their determination returned, and by the end of the day, the hero's companion casually asked him to finish the evening by applying medicinal ointment to his bruised and battered body. As dawn broke over the mountain, a bitter cold chilled the chubby boy to the bone, making his anxiety even worse. He couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen, while the protagonist remained calm and determined, simply waiting for the battle to begin. The master wasted no time. With one sharp pull of a lever, she unleashed chaos. A massive avalanche of giant boulders came crashing down the mountainside, catching the pair completely off guard. Between panicked screams and desperate pleas about not wanting to die single, the protagonist kept giving orders, dodge everything, and strike back whenever possible. The training had evolved. What had once been blind panic was now controlled adaptation. They moved with precision, avoiding the larger boulders while knocking the smaller ones aside. The master watched without emotion, firmly believing that pushing someone to the very edge of death was the only way to achieve true growth, while making sure they didn't actually die. Once the storm of rocks ended, it was finally time for a meal break. While the chubby boy relaxed and enjoyed the chance to rest, the protagonist stayed on high alert. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. A thick, oppressive fog swallowed the entire area. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was the calm before disaster. The hero's instincts immediately kicked in. He knew this fog wasn't part of the training. It was the warning sign that something far more sinister than a simple landslide was about to happen. The fog wasn't part of the exercise at all, it was cover for an ambush. Everything changed within seconds. An arrow sliced through the air toward the teacher, and despite her incredible reflexes, she was caught completely off guard. The assault didn't stop there. Magical crystals began raining down on her, and an enemy seized the opportunity to land a precise strike to her forehead. The villain's objective was obvious: turn the master into a puppet, then eliminate the protagonist and his ally, leaving the rest of the group completely vulnerable. The moment they realized the teacher's protection had fallen, the chubby boy nearly froze in panic. The protagonist reacted immediately, drawing on Donatia's reserves. He forced his companion to swallow a recovery pill, ignoring all the complaints about how suspicious the medicine looked. Survival was the only thing that mattered. Instead of taking the main route, which was already under enemy control, they decided to climb the mountain themselves under the cover of the thick smoke. As they climbed, the allies' hands shook from both exhaustion and fear, but the protagonist became his anchor, helping him every step of the way. As brutal as the training had been, it was finally paying off. Despite the overwhelming physical strain, they now had the endurance to keep moving under immense pressure. Their goal was simple: reach the summit and discover the true scale of the attack, no matter the cost. When they finally reached the top, the fog began to clear, revealing a horrifying sight. The teacher had been completely subdued and was now nothing more than a puppet under the invaders' control. The protagonist carefully assessed the situation. If someone as powerful as her had been defeated in the canyon, charging in head-on would be nothing short of suicide. Meanwhile, unable to locate the group inside the fog, the enemies split into search parties and began combing the mountain. The villain relied on psychological manipulation to keep the master under his control. Watching everything unfold, the chubby ally was suddenly overcome with courage and volunteered to create a distraction. Ignoring the enormous risk, he gathered his energy and launched a reckless frontal attack against the enemies. Completely unfazed, the puppet master calmly sent one of his dolls to intercept him. Poisoned darts whistled through the air, but the boy narrowly managed to dodge them. It was during that brief exchange that the protagonist discovered the enemy's weakness. The puppet master was vulnerable whenever his dolls were actively fighting. Determined to capitalize on the opening, he rushed in to support his friend, despite the villain looking down on them as nothing more than two foolish kids. By the time the puppet master positioned his dolls for a finishing attack, the protagonist was already prepared to break the rhythm of that deadly dance. With one perfectly timed move, Buddha's hand shattered the puppets, creating the opening they needed. The protagonist immediately gave the order to attack, and the chubby ally poured every ounce of his strength into a devastating punch that knocked the villain unconscious, allowing them to rescue the teacher. They fled without wasting a second, but their victory didn't last long. The criminal quickly regained consciousness in a fit of rage, and after hearing the group's movements, he led a relentless pursuit. The situation became desperate when they reached the edge of an impassable cliff. With nowhere left to run, the chubby ally made a selfless decision, ordering the protagonist to escape with the teacher while he stayed behind as a distraction. The protagonist refused without hesitation. Abandoning his friend was never an option, but it seemed like fate had already sealed their destiny. Ween appeared moments later, surrounded by his subordinates, laughing as though they had walked straight into the perfect trap. Mocking them, he asked where they thought they could possibly run now. Lin Miao stood frozen, overwhelmed by the terrible luck that had led them into the canyon. Ween delivered his final ultimatum: surrender immediately or die. Desperate, the protagonist begged Donatia's system for help, only to receive the new interface's usual cold response: without enough funds, there would be no miracles. His frustration finally boiled over. If no one was coming to save them, then he would have to fight his own way out. Without a second thought, the protagonist ordered the chubby boy to hand over every dollar and every piece of jewelry he had on him. Confused but loyal, his friend obeyed. Watching the scene unfold with a smug grin, Ween burst into laughter, convinced the boys had completely lost their minds and were actually trying to bribe him. Their total came to 7.5 million. The system asked what he intended to spend it on, and the protagonist answered without hesitation. He needed a technique capable of paralyzing the enemy instantly. The system's response was a crushing disappointment. Only Donatia possessed techniques like that, and nothing in the current database even came close. Growing desperate, the boy searched for temporary power-boosting pills, but despite how large his balance seemed, it wasn't nearly enough to afford any top-tier resources. The system's obsession with making sales reached a ridiculous level when it suggested buying a flying machine completely useless with death just seconds away. Time had run out. The protagonist begged the system to teleport them back to the academy, but the distance required more credits than they could afford. As the system refused to provide any charity, Ween and his men closed in, charging their magical attacks for the finishing blow. Death crept closer with every passing second, and the system that was supposed to help had become little more than an execution notice. In one final act of desperation, the protagonist ordered the system to teleport them to the vehicle parked at the base of the mountain. This time, they had just enough money. A deafening explosion covered their escape, blinding the enemies behind a cloud of smoke and debris. Ween stood frozen in disbelief, unable to comprehend how the pair had escaped such a perfect ambush using technology like that. The moment they landed, urgency gave way to extreme caution. The protagonist stopped his chubby friend from approaching the car, as his instincts warned him just in time. The vehicle had been rigged with explosives. It was unmistakably Ween's style of trap. As they tried to figure out what was happening, the strange bird that had been following them for so long continued watching Fan Hang's every move. Before it could keep spying, it was suddenly destroyed. That was when the teacher finally snapped out of her trance and revealed the truth. The bird wasn't alive at all. It was a mechanical surveillance device. Their game of cat and mouse had just entered a whole new level of technological warfare. The villain quickly realized his trap had failed. With the surveillance device destroyed, the protagonist demanded that the explosives be removed from the car. The teacher agreed, but the price was his cell phone, which the system surrendered without hesitation. A cheap yet efficient mining robot solved the problem with ease. Frustrated, the villain attempted to detonate the explosives remotely, but by then the vehicle was already out of range. When they spotted an armored military vehicle nearby, the protagonist immediately came up with a plan for revenge. He placed the bomb underneath the enemy's vehicle. His goal wasn't to destroy the armor, that would have been nearly impossible, but to disable the drivetrain long enough to buy some time. Having lost all patience, Ween abandoned any pretense and launched a direct assault, determined to kill the protagonist himself. Jinwoo stepped onto the front lines, prepared to do whatever it took to protect her students. The conflict quickly escalated into something far greater than a simple battle. The hero revealed that the Yan Lin family was backed by 88 members of the Guanyin Temple, a force powerful enough to influence the balance of power. Ween mocked the attempt to intimidate him and immediately challenged the master. Pukas reaffirmed his unwavering loyalty, refusing to leave his brother's side. In the middle of the chaos, the protagonist reached a disturbing realization. Even if they managed to defeat Ween, there were far darker and far more dangerous forces pulling the strings behind the scenes. The pursuers jumped into their vehicle and ordered the driver to move out, but the chase ended before it even began. The moment the engine was pushed into motion, the hidden explosive detonated, destroying the propulsion system and locking up the brakes. Immobilized and unable to continue, the villains could only watch helplessly as their target escaped. Back at the academy, everything appeared normal until Fan Hang and his companion discovered an official expulsion notice issued by Director Liu. Fortunately, the threat was quickly neutralized when Zen Inju stepped in, taking it upon herself to confront the academy's leadership. When they arrived at the dormitory, the welcome was anything but friendly. A group of students mocked the situation, convinced Fan Hang's expulsion was inevitable. Without showing the slightest sign of weakness, the protagonist ignored their taunts and calmly asked where the money was that they owed him as compensation. Certain that he was nothing more than a fool about to be thrown out, they laughed in his face. Fan Hang's expression suddenly changed as the bullies continued pushing their luck. He ordered his companion to record everything on video while calmly exposing the dirty secrets of every one of his enemies. He detailed Wang Wei's assault on a woman on the night of the 12th, along with Fan An's crimes from the previous day. The accuracy of the information left the entire group stunned, unable to understand how the protagonist knew so much. Their arrogance instantly turned into panic as they realized the blackmail had completely reversed, and now they were the ones begging him not to release the footage. The pressure worked immediately. With no other choice, the bullies not only agreed to pay every cent they owed, but also volunteered to go see Director Liu and publicly retract every lie they had spread. One of the defeated troublemakers tearfully handed over his last dollar, finally settling the debt. The protagonist accepted the payment and ended the matter right there, leaving his chubby friend completely confused. He couldn't understand why the hero hadn't humiliated the rival family to the very end. The answer was cold and simple. The enemy clan was already falling apart from within, and dragging the conflict out wasn't worth the effort. As they left the academy, the atmosphere changed completely. A huge crowd blocked their path, made up of the school's most popular female students, all shouting passionate declarations of admiration. For one brief moment, the protagonist thought the commotion was for him, but his companion quickly corrected him. The signs they were holding all displayed someone else's name. Ini, the Academy's legendary prodigy. Ini's popularity was overwhelming. Students of every gender openly declared their admiration for him without the slightest embarrassment. The chubby boy, clearly impressed, pointed out that Ini had become a true celebrity despite coming from a humble background. Fan Hang, on the other hand, simply scoffed. To him, the endless worship was completely ridiculous, and if he ever crossed paths with this so-called hero, he wouldn't hesitate to settle things with his fists. While his friend grew increasingly jealous watching so many girls compete for Ini's attention, the protagonist stayed calm, doing his best to keep him grounded. The protagonist tried to calm his friend's jealousy, assuring him that once he reached the required level, plenty of the Academy's most sought-after girls would be interested in him too. Wasting no time, he walked over to Ini and struck up a conversation. After greeting the prodigy and mentioning that he had watched the recording of his battle on the forums, the mood became surprisingly friendly. Ini complimented the young man's abilities, but the response was blunt. To the protagonist, the video wasn't anything special, and he was completely confident he could perform even better. Without beating around the bush, the protagonist wished Ini good luck and admitted that he actually liked him. When the conversation shifted toward breaking old records, he teased the legendary student, suggesting that he must be bothered seeing his achievements about to be surpassed. Ini, however, responded with complete indifference. To the veteran, those accomplishments belonged to a distant chapter of his life, back when he was nothing more than an ordinary student. The idea of feeling threatened by someone else's growth had never even crossed his mind. Dressed in a flawless white and gold uniform, bids farewell with a calm smile, promising they'll meet again soon. Fan and Chubby spot Professor Ji standing in the courtyard. When Fan calmly asks why they were summoned so urgently, the woman with long brown hair fires back with a blunt ultimatum. Because of their lack of effort, they would begin special training immediately. The news hits like a truck. Chubby slumps in complete disappointment, convinced his suffering was finally over, while Fan's exhaustion is practically written all over his face. Smirking sarcastically, Professor Shi asks if either of them is even capable of standing up to Chen Wei. The taunt lands perfectly. Ji notices the spark of envy in Fan's eyes as he thinks about someone truly powerful, then questions whether he really wants to become someone important at the Academy. The effect is immediate. His frustration vanishes, replaced by burning determination. Fan immediately demands the details of the training, while Chubby grins excitedly beside him. She reveals that they will have a very special training partner. She snaps her fingers. A loud boom echoes through the courtyard, and the same mysterious man appears, striking dramatic kung fu poses. He challenges the two boys to attack him together, eager to see what they're really capable of. They freeze in shock. The training is absolutely brutal, leaving behind sweat, rapid footsteps, and screams of pain. By sunset, the three of them are standing on the rooftop. The imposing man watches Chubby lying flat on the ground while Fan leans against the fence in frustration. The mentor reflects on the enormous gap in power between people. Chubby curses how useless he still feels despite his hidden advantages, while Fan is forced to face the harsh reality of true geniuses. Fan, completely battered and drenched in cold sweat, finally had to wave the white flag, begging for a break. Letting out a nervous laugh, he admitted he never imagined he'd meet the Academy's legendary #1 while getting beaten up this badly. Chin Ji, the purple-haired upperclassman, simply smiled and joked that getting punched around was a great way to break the ice. Lying on the ground covered in bruises, Chubby groaned in pain and bluntly admitted that if it weren't for Professor Shi's influence, someone at Chin Ji's level would never waste time training ordinary students like them. Staring off into the distance, the upperclassman gratefully admitted that Professor Shi had helped him more than anyone in the past. Seeing an opening, Fan wasted no time. With a confident grin, he pulled out his phone and pitched an idea. Since life at the prestigious Yunlin Academy was ridiculously expensive, why not secure sponsorship from a major corporation? Chin Ji immediately tried to turn it down, waving his hands modestly and insisting that his scholarship would be enough. But Fan was already prepared. With a sharp look, he reminded him that the competition outside was ruthless and that his scholarship wouldn't even cover his medical bills, adding that the deal would benefit his own family as well. The mood turned more serious when Chin Ji lowered his head, remembering all the years of hard work and sacrifice his parents had endured, a debt he felt he could never truly repay. Even with one side of his face swollen, Chubby jumped into the conversation to ease the burden, explaining that corporate sponsorship was simply good marketing and that everyone involved would benefit. Without giving Chin-ji another chance to refuse, Fan already had his phone pressed against his ear, wearing a huge grin. He practically ordered Chin-ji to accept the offer and promised that one day he'd help out his younger brothers in return. Chubby delivered the final selling point by revealing that the massive Hongxing group belonged to Fan's father and that sponsoring Chin-ji would be pocket change for a company that size. On the other end of the call, Fan's father, a man in a suit with a thick mustache, answered between heavy coughing fits. Fan's tone changed instantly. His playful attitude disappeared, replaced by genuine concern as he insisted that his father call his private doctor right away. His father smiled warmly, reassuring his son that he had already scheduled a checkup before bluntly asking if the kid was calling because he needed more money. With a focused, serious look, Fan got straight to the point. He didn't want money for himself. He wanted the company to sponsor Chin-ji. The businessman immediately understood what his son was getting at, recognizing the prodigy's reputation and incredible talent. He agreed to the partnership on the spot, approving an initial sponsorship fund. To top it all off, impressed by his son's brilliant business sense, Fan's father even promised to deposit a multi-million bonus directly into his account, admitting that not even the company's planning department had come up with such a smart move. With the funding secured and his friend taken care of, Fan let out a huge smile of relief and happiness, thanked his father, and once again reminded the old man to take better care of his health. With the deal finalized, Fan stood there wearing a confident smile, holding a VIP card while proudly displaying the bruises from his recent battle like badges of honor. Everything had fallen perfectly into place. Not only had he secured the sponsorship, but he also revealed his secret trump card, a glowing golden pill. As he handed it over, Fan quietly hoped Chin-ji wouldn't think the gift was too cheap, considering it was literally the lowest tier reward his system had ever given him. Chin-ji's reaction couldn't have been better. His eyes lit up behind his glasses the moment he recognized the Xuanyang pill, instantly realizing just how unbelievably rare it was. Without hesitation, the two shook hands. Filled with gratitude, Chin-ji made it clear that whenever Fan needed a favor, he'd be there. As they walked away, the mood was pure victory. Chubby was practically bursting with excitement, praising Fan's unbelievable business instincts. Fan, however, was already thinking several moves ahead. He knew that if he wanted to stand against his enemies, especially Chen Wei, he would need powerful allies. Having the future star of Yunlin Academy on his side was a masterstroke. Even so, Fan raised his hand, stopping Chubby's excitement, and seriously reminded him that connections alone weren't enough. They had to become stronger themselves. Chubby nodded immediately, his fighting spirit burning. While the heroes planned their future, evil was already at work elsewhere. A well-dressed man in a purple sweater spoke on the phone, clearly frustrated. He reported to his father that Fan was far more cunning than expected, and that he still hadn't managed to get his hands on a certain notebook. On the other end of the line, an older man with a sinister gaze mercilessly insulted his son's incompetence. He declared that he'd send someone else to finish the job before revealing a chilling piece of news. The old man had already been poisoned and would no longer be a problem. The younger man simply smiled wickedly, fully agreeing with the dirty plan. Later that night, Fan's phone rang. It was Chin-ji, now wearing an apron and holding a broom, looking visibly embarrassed. The upperclassman explained that one of Yunlin Academy's senior instructors had gone absolutely crazy over the Xuanyang pill and was offering an outrageous deal, 100 million in cash plus 5 special pills in exchange for that single item. Relaxing in his room, Fan smiled to himself. Calmly, he replied that the pill now belonged to Chin-ji, giving him complete freedom to accept the offer and enjoy the fortune. After hanging up, Fan reflected on Chin-ji's honesty. He was genuinely surprised that the upperclassman hadn't simply pocketed the money without saying a word, but what truly blew Fan's mind was the insane market value of that pill. It had been the cheapest reward his system had ever given him, yet it was still worth a fortune. His eyes gleamed with greed as a bold idea formed in his mind. He summoned his spiritual assistant, affectionately calling her Cuz. A majestic blonde woman instantly appeared on his bed. Without wasting a second, she read through his resale plans with a single sharp glance and immediately shut them down with a serious warning. Selling those items would attract far too much unwanted attention. The pressure hit hard. Breaking into a cold sweat while forcing an awkward smile, Fan raised both hands and promised his spiritual assistant that he'd keep a low profile and stay out of trouble. Then he immediately asked Cuz to calculate the true size of his financial disaster. Focusing on a holographic calculator, the blonde woman dropped the bomb without the slightest hesitation. Including accumulated interest, his total debt had surpassed an unbelievable 12 billion. The shock hit so hard that Fan's eyes nearly popped out of his head in panic. And the nightmare wasn't over. Remaining completely emotionless, she informed him that time was running out. He had just over 26 days left before the deadline expired. Completely cornered, Fan swallowed his pride and admitted defeat, demanding immediate access to the system's pill catalog. Letting out a heavy sigh, he was at least relieved that his family's resources could serve as his starting capital. Staring at a floating marketplace filled with items costing up to 100 billion, he didn't hesitate before purchasing a 10 million artifact, confidently grinning as he declared that someone else would be paying the bill anyway. His confidence returned in full force. The next step was to infiltrate the Jinlin auction house and make a fortune, but to do that, he needed to remain anonymous. Kaz offered him an ability capable of changing both his appearance and his voice at the same time, warning that it came at an enormous cost. Fan simply shrugged with his usual mischievous grin, since the money would be coming out of someone else's pocket. Standing before the massive and luxurious Jinlin auction house, the doors opened for a refined blonde man wearing glasses and a perfectly tailored suit. It was none other than Fan, now disguised under the fake identity of Kwang Fan. Carrying himself like a high-ranking executive, he confidently informed the receptionist that he had business to conduct and was immediately escorted to the VIP room. Inside the appraisal office, arrogance filled the air. A bespectacled appraiser was ruthlessly throwing an elderly woman out, refusing to evaluate her valuable pearl simply because the prestigious auction house didn't handle anything worth less than 2 million. Right in the middle of that tense moment, Fan confidently pushed the door open. Instantly taking control of the room, he raised a small box containing a glowing blue sphere and presented his item. Curious, the appraiser asked to inspect it. The very second the pill touched his hands, his arrogant attitude completely vanished. His eyes widened in disbelief as he sensed the artifact's incredible quality and extraordinary fragrance, declaring in amazement that it was worthy of elite martial-grade status. Completely panicked, the appraiser began shouting for his superior, demanding that he come immediately to witness such a rare treasure. The bait had been taken perfectly. The atmosphere inside the VIP room grew even more intense. As the receptionist served coffee, the sharply dressed appraiser was already calculating his commission, confidently stating that the pill would easily sell for more than 100 million, even after all of the auction house's fees. His excitement was interrupted by the arrival of the head appraiser. An experienced older man with a goatee stepped forward. Pulling out a magnifying glass, the veteran confirmed the pill's extraordinary purity simply from its fragrance and its flawless internal structure, declaring it an elixir of the highest possible quality. Aiming for the biggest profit possible, the old man suggested saving the artifact for the company's grand annual auction. Fan accepted the proposal with a confident smile, but his entire plan fell apart the very next second. When he asked for the date, he discovered the event wouldn't take place until the end of next month. Panic immediately set in. The deadline to repay his massive debt would arrive long before then. Out of options, he desperately begged his spiritual assistant for more time, only to be met with her sarcastic, mocking response. With the clock ticking, Fan's expression darkened. He quickly grabbed the box off the table and announced that the deal was off. Just as he was about to leave, a hand covered in expensive jewelry stopped him. An elegant, commanding woman wearing a stunning red dress stepped into his path, radiating authority. Cutting the old man off without hesitation, she made an aggressive move to keep her customer from walking away. She offered an immediate 1 billion advance, guaranteeing that the remaining payment would be delivered after the auction. At that exact moment, Fan's phone vibrated in his pocket, confirming the massive transfer. Seeing his bank account suddenly overflowing with money, he stopped in his tracks and flashed a sly grin. The game had just changed. Taking advantage of the momentum, Fan realized this was the perfect time to go all in. As casually as if it were nothing, he pulled a second small box from his sleeve, revealing a glowing orange pill radiating intense light. The elderly appraiser nearly fell out of his chair. Holding his magnifying glass with trembling hands, he stared in complete disbelief before declaring that it was a true sacred-grade national treasure. Instantly, Fan remembered questioning his magical assistant about the absurd quality of those items. With her usual confidence, the blonde had proudly declared that the system produced nothing but unmatched masterpieces. faces. The appraiser quickly pulled the auction house's owner aside and whispered about the treasure's unbelievable potential. The opening bid alone would start at no less than $2 billion, and if the nation's wealthiest tycoons started competing, it could easily climb beyond $10 billion. Smiling victoriously, the woman declared that the item would become the grand finale and main attraction of the company's annual auction. Without wasting any time, she made the offer that completely changed everything. $10 billion deposited immediately, with the remaining profits to be paid after the auction hammer fell. Fan accepted without changing his expression, but inside he was celebrating like crazy. Curious about the incredible quality of the items, the old appraiser asked whether the sharply dressed man was an alchemist. Fan's mind immediately went to work. He knew alchemists were treated like living gods in this world, so adopting that fake identity was the perfect move to command respect. To seal the partnership, the auction house owner personally handed him a golden VIP card, exempting the master from every buying and selling fee within the multi-billion-dollar company. Things got even better when the woman, smiling warmly, asked for his contact information so they could discuss future exclusive business opportunities. Fan broke into a cold sweat for a moment. There was no way he could risk being tracked. Silently begging his system for a financial miracle, he pulled a strange dark communicator from his pocket, one equipped with completely untraceable technology, while internally crying over the ridiculous price he had paid for it. The moment he showed off the unusual device, the reaction was priceless. The auction house owner was completely amazed, immediately assuming that even his communication device was an advanced piece of equipment exclusive to the world of alchemy. Maintaining the flawless image of an untouchable professional, Fan gave her the number and laid down his conditions. He only accepted custom orders, and every commission required an advance payment. The woman smiled and agreed without hesitation, fully aware that this was how legendary masters did business. With his pockets overflowing, his fake identity perfectly established, and the entire staff bowing respectfully before him, Fan turned around and confidently walked out into the street like he owned the place. Inside the luxurious auction house office, the owner celebrated her incredible stroke of luck. Having a master alchemist working with them would send the company's prestige soaring across the entire country. The exciting news spread through the industry's underground circles almost immediately. Elsewhere in the city, a wealthy businessman received an alert on his phone, informing him that a new legendary alchemist had just appeared on the radar. Without wasting a second, the tycoon immediately began planning how to win the mysterious master's favor. Meanwhile, far away from all the attention, Fan believed he had already beaten the game. Overflowing with confidence, he summoned his magical assistant and demanded access to the system's shop, determined to buy a divine-grade treasure so he could instantly obtain overwhelming power and solve all of his problems at once. His partner looked at him with complete impatience before giving him a harsh reality check. She bluntly explained that the system didn't waste time selling low-level junk and warned him about the deadly consequences of his reckless idea. If he swallowed such an overwhelmingly powerful medicine without the proper physical foundation, the energy inside it would tear his body apart and make him explode on the spot. The harsh warning was enough to bring Fan back down to earth. He finally realized that building a strong foundation was far more important than relying on magical shortcuts. But his concern didn't last long. A huge grin spread across his face as he laughed to himself, knowing the auction money would wipe out his debts once and for all. His assistant immediately shut down his excitement, reminding him that easy money doesn't exist, and bluntly pointing out the enormous risk of someone discovering that his identity as a master alchemist was nothing but a complete fraud. Still overflowing with confidence, Fan fired back with a bold declaration, insisting he was ready for any battle. At that exact moment, his untraceable communicator rang. A powerful man named Chen Wei was on the line, requesting a face-to-face meeting to discuss a custom potion. Ignoring his companion's warning to stop playing with fire, the fake master smirked, ready to reel in his first big catch. The decisive meeting took place at a luxurious cafe. The wealthy Chen Wei got straight to the point, begging the master to forge a legendary relic known as the Infinite Flames Pill. Behind the flawless image of an untouchable expert, calmly sipping his coffee with perfect elegance, Fan was secretly breaking into a cold sweat because he had absolutely no idea what the pill even was. Mentally calling for help, he turned to his magical assistant. Her response was simple and ruthless. As long as the reward was worth it, she'd provide the secret recipe immediately. With the information now locked into his mind, the fake master put on quite a performance. He confidently listed the absurd ingredients Chen Wei would have to gather, leaving the wealthy businessman and his bodyguards completely amazed by his incredible knowledge. Taking advantage of the customer's desperation, Fan delivered the perfect finishing blow. He explained that forging such an item item required an incredibly difficult technique and would cost a modest 100 million, payable entirely in advance. Without a second thought, the businessman handed over his loaded bank card. The moment the money was secured, the con artist laid out the golden rule that would protect him from any future problems. In a cold tone, he warned that creating such an artifact carried enormous risks, and that he would accept absolutely no responsibility if the process ended in complete failure. Chen Wei swallowed his frustration, silently annoyed by the unbelievable advantage alchemists held in the market, but agreed to wait the full 49 days required to complete the order. Behind the scenes, the system assistant threw another bucket of cold water on Fan's plans, warning him that buying the supreme-grade item from the magical shop would cost an outrageous fortune. That's when Fan revealed his most devilish smile yet. He had never intended to deliver the product in the first place, relying entirely on the production failure, excuse that his customer had already accepted. In his mind, the logic was flawless. Chen Wei specialized in ice-based powers, so ordering an artifact of ultimate fire practically screamed trap. As far as Fan was concerned, outsmarting someone who was already plotting against him was simply basic survival. Meanwhile, the auction house owner was busier than ever. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing as influential figures desperately begged for more miraculous treasures, offering to pay twice the asking price without hesitation. The elderly appraiser praised her brilliant decision to hand over the golden VIP card, calling it the perfect move to earn the mysterious master's loyalty. Wasting no time, she picked up her phone and placed an enormous order. Back at the cafe, the fake master's untraceable communicator rang right in the middle of the meeting. Putting on quite a show and pretending to be overwhelmed with customers, he accepted the woman's request but drove an incredibly hard bargain. He demanded an 80% rush fee and insisted on receiving half the payment immediately. The moment the call ended, the screen lit up with a notification for everyone nearby to see. 630 million had just been transferred into his account directly from the giant auction house. The wealthy man sitting across from him nearly fell out of his chair. Completely stunned by the prestige of the man before him, he swallowed his pride and begged for his own order to be expedited as well. The con artist paused dramatically before explaining that he possessed a secret method capable of drastically shortening the forging process. However, he warned that it consumed an enormous amount of energy, making the cost astronomical. On top of that, rushing the process greatly increased the risk of complete failure. Blinded by greed and the dream of obtaining a supreme-grade artifact, the businessman accepted the risk without hesitation. To seal the rushed order, the client slid over another bank card containing an additional 80 million solely as an expedited service fee. Fan pocketed the money without the slightest change in expression, promised to speed things up, and disappeared from the cafe in the blink of an eye, claiming that his schedule was packed with important business. The moment the well-dressed man vanished from sight, paranoia began creeping into Chen Wei's mind. It suddenly seemed suspicious that an alchemy genius had appeared out of nowhere, delivering impossible results in record time. His right-hand man quickly tried to reassure him, reminding him that the mysterious master had the backing of the city's largest auction house. Smiling wickedly, Chen Wei calmly calculated the risks. Compared to what the auction house had invested, his own payment was relatively small. If the so-called master turned out to be a fraud and disappeared with the money, the auction house would lose billions, and they'd be the ones hunting him down instead. The fake master wasted no time taking on even more orders, casually listing one rare pill after another while the auction house owner listened carefully. Even so, she couldn't help but warn him that accumulating so much wealth so quickly was an incredibly dangerous game one that could ultimately cost him his life. Fan simply laughed off the warning, convinced that the easy money was worth every risk. Fate answered immediately. His phone rang with devastating news. His father was on the verge of death in the hospital and needed him there immediately. When Fan arrived, the atmosphere felt more like a funeral than a hospital. His father twisted violently in pain, making horrifying, animal-like sounds as though he had been poisoned by something truly sinister. The doctor didn't sugarcoat the situation. There was no cure, and he had only hours left to live. Panic consumed Fan when he realized his father's body was rejecting even the miraculous substances he had access to. His assistant, staring at him with an icy expression, quietly explained that saving him would require a price far greater than Fan could possibly imagine. In an instant, everything turned upside down. The hunter had become the hunted, forced to watch the empire of lies he had built begin to collapse alongside the health of the one person he should have protected the most. If you enjoyed this intense story packed with twists and turns, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode, and let me know in the comments what you think about this desperate situation. Thanks for watching, take care, and God bless you all.